Reptichip sets the standard for reptile substrates. Made from the highest quality coconut available anywhere in the world, Reptichip allows enthusiasts and keepers to provide their reptiles with the necessary humidity and thermoregulation required for your animals to thrive. You can support the podcast by heading to reptichip.com/snakeboy or visit the link in the description below. This episode is brought to you in part by Exoterra. If you're as passionate about reptiles and amphibians as I am, you know that quality matters. I use Exoterra products on all my reptile and amphibian enclosures, which is why I'm excited to be partnering with them. From naturalistic decor to innovative lighting and enclosures of all sizes, Exoterra has everything you need for your cold-blooded companions. Exoterra, make your reptiles feel at home. This episode is brought to you in part by Unlimited Exotic Pets. Every day is Veranda Day for Nick Lillis, and it shows. At Unlimited Exotic Pets, Nick produces high-quality monitor lizards with a deep commitment to ethical care practices and top-tier nutrition. These aren't just pets. They're responsibly bred, ethically raised animals. Whether you're looking for a new companion, starting a breeding project, or anything in between, Nick has you covered. Unlimited Exotic Pets, keeping and breeding quality without limitations. Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 86 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Chris Montross of Darkhorse Herpetoculture. And Chris, I think you're my first colubrid centric guest. So
ooh.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Now, I do keep quite a few others outside of that realm, but that's my main focus for sure.
Yeah, I know you have pythons too, and we'll definitely get into talking about those. But you deal with a lot of locality colubrids, right? Nerodia, rat snakes.
Yeah, these days just Nerodia and Pantherophis from the southeast-ish portion of the country. Parted with all my locality kings a couple years ago now, and just staying focused on the projects that I've got going at this point.
Okay. And what is that like? I mean, so a lot of your Nerodia, do you go out and collect them yourself?
Yes, or a close friend will get me some animals from their area where they live. They'll be like, hey, take a look at these, what these bandits look like near me or otherwise, and and they'll hook me up with a couple to get, a project going and see how it goes type of thing. So, but yeah, it's a combination of one of those, sort of things in most cases.
And what does that look like getting those established? Like because I mean, so where I work, I see Nerodia all the time, and they can be pretty gnarly, snakes.
in the field, they can be pretty irascible for sure. Once you kind of have them, and they're in captivity, even just still while you're say in the field and you're, holding on to them to take photos or whatever you happen to be doing, most of them calm down pretty quickly. Uh, I've had plenty of, animals that are, wild caught stock that I have in here that are like super baby tame. They're great. And so there's some species over others that are way better temperament wise, and some that like very quickly become super chill and others that kind of never do.
Yeah.
But even as captive born, some of those particular species or subspecies kind of never do. I tend to favor the ones that have a little bit better temperaments. I, get tired of them just being, crappy bitey stuff. So
Yeah.
I've tended to focus in on certain stuff over others, mostly bandeds and salt marshes, but I keep diamondbacks and erythrogaster and stuff like that too. So they're all most of the Nerodia though. People just don't get that honestly they're better than my kings ever were. Like way better captives. They're just better temperaments, more alert, much in the same way garters. So the same thing the garter people get out of working with that genus. I get the same thing. They're much more alert. Most of them are much more active, or at least when you're in there working around, they're like, "Hey, is it time? You gonna feed me? You coming in here to mess with us in some way?" And they're right there, and they're not necessarily going to come out and try to hit me or anything. They're just they'll actually come right out and get in my arms. That's what I want to do, so I can look them over, sort of thing. So,
wow,
it's most of my wild caught rats that I've got are definitely snippier than most of my waters are, for sure.
And what does that process look like of establishing something from the wild? Like, how do you deal with parasites that are internal and external? Or, like what does that look like? And how concerned are you about, viral things or bacterial, or even, things like pentastomes and stuff? Like
Sure.
how do you tackle all that?
Initially, a lot of it's just getting them set up and getting them happy, getting them to feel mentally secure, physically secure, that they don't have, predators immediately around them that are going to attack them. So, give them hide options, putting them in a thermal environment that they're happy with. That's the biggest thing initially. Anything that comes into my house immediately just gets treated for anything external, because that's an easy thing to spread. In the case of wild caught stuff, it's much less of a situation than I worry about with getting stuff from somebody else's collection. That tends to be more of a problem. If I get, a project from somebody else, either a bunch of baby F1 stuff from somebody, that usually ends up being more of a problem. Internal parasites, I've kind of changed my role with that over the years, and I've rolled more with leave them alone as much as possible. Don't mess with it as much as possible, because the deparasitation process, giving them panicures, giving them flagells, giving them ivermectins, giving them all those sorts of drugs, are really, really hard on them. You're not just getting rid of any parasites that those particular drugs, hit the spectrum of. You're also just ripping all the flora and fauna in their GI tract that is super beneficial to them being healthy and happy. It just rips it straight out of the gut. And so you can make the situation way worse by going in there and just hitting them with panicure and hitting them stuff like that. So my main focus is getting them happy, getting them eating, and just getting them content with the change that has occurred to them. That's my main focus. And a lot of the parasites that, let's say Nerodia in that case, have indirect life cycles. So as long as I'm not putting live food items into them, which in some cases initially I may have to get them started if they don't want to jump right on what I want to offer them. As long as I'm not continuing to put in new parasites into them, what may or may not be what may be still in them from as a wild animal is going to live it's going to live its life and not be able to reproduce within the snake, because they have to have another host animal, be it a frog, a fish, or whatever. The same way heartworms work in dogs. You can't, heartworms just don't reproduce in a dog. They have to go through life stages in a mosquito to complete their life cycle. And a lot of parasites, not all, a lot of parasites have that same life cycle. So one of the bad ones with Nerodia, I say bad ones, nematodes, and you get fish and frogs and stuff like that. But they have to have a life cycle outside of the snake in order to get back in. So those parasites are going to live their life. They're going to die. But as long as you're not bringing new stuff in, you're not going to end up with a reinfection. So it's a balance. But for me, and I hear some other breeder people kind of take the same approach that deal with either imports or wild caught type stuff. They found that actually just making the animal happy, getting them established, getting them feeding is more important than anything else. And that tends to be my focus rather than just going and ripping all the important stuff out of their gut, attempting to get rid of some of the bad stuff that they've been living with their whole life anyways.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been hearing that more and more. It seems like more and more people are just kind of focusing on having the animal be content and have the lowest level of stress possible and consistent food and then addressing a problem if there is one. So I'm assuming, like, when would you address it? If you're looking at their stools and you're seeing visibly parasites squirming around?
Unhealthy stools, not gaining weight, not holding weight, those sorts of things, any of that sort of stuff. And I do periodically, not very often, but periodically, usually more with import stuff. If I get in, a new python or something like that through an import process where there's a not great quality of life from initially being caught to making it to my hands through that whole process, I'll tend to run fecals at work just to see if there's anything going on. And honestly, to date, on the handful of them I've done over the last few years, I've never found anything. So I've just rolled with it, and a lot of the water snakes, like I said, they're really sensitive to a lot of drugs and even like external stuff, using stuff like preventamites and stuff like that. They'll die in a heartbeat and expose that stuff. So I tend to, I've got a little mixture of ivermectin and soap that I use on anything that's coming in. They get sprayed with directly and they sit in it, in a bucket type situation for a while, 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever my period of time allows for that, to make sure that I'm removing any sort of external stuff. And then just basically just trying to make them happy and get them feeding and established. That's my main goal, and not trying to screw up anything that's already been, because in the case of a lot of my rat snakes and water snakes, I'm catching them and bringing them right in, and there's not a big delay like people who work with, imported pythons, boas, and colubrids from other parts of the country have to deal with, where there's a lengthy months, weeks, whatever process and handling and poor sanitary conditions, no hydration and everything. Those animals go through a lot worse, and then parasites are a different story because they haven't been in a healthy balance of lifestyle for an extended period of time. You've got a whole different game under those circumstances.
You said stool sample or running, doing an exam on one at work. What do you do for work?
I work in the veterinary field and have for quite a number of years now, pushing 20 years now since I left the zoo profession. So
okay.
I can slip in a fecal here and there if I'm have a worry or a concern, and see if there's anything
that's handy.
To raise any flags for myself. But on the whole, like I said, with most of these guys, because with a lot of the rat snakes and water snakes, if it's something I'm catching or a friend is catching, there's no downtime between them going from where they were to going into an environment that doesn't have any predators, and hopefully is ideally set up based on my experience and understanding of what they need, and get right in and get them feeding. That there's little stress and physical stress on them to cause a big shift in their quality of life.
Is preventamite more dangerous for colubrids than it is for boas and pythons?
I've never used the product. I know of people that have. I had somebody pick up some pair of young water snakes from me, like at a Daytona thing for a buddy of his that bought them off me, and the friend was going to Daytona, so he picked them up, and he was going to have them for a short period of time before they made it to the original guy. And he did his normal protocol of and I don't even know what all he kept normally, but where he, preventamited his little containers, and did whatever the procedure is, and then like put them in there and walked away and came back, and within 30 minutes they were dead. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like, dude, they were great. Like there's a couple little bandits, and once he started telling me what he did, I was like, oh yeah, that just yeah, you killed him. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of pyrethrins and other drugs out there. They're just some species of snakes are more sensitive than others. Some genuses are more sensitive than others. Just like there's certain stuff you can do with a python you can't do with a tortoise. There's a lot of animals just are more sensitive to things than others, and that's just part of the game. So finding ways to deal with it that isn't so acutely bad. Most of those, drugs, they're strong, they're bad. There's reasons why you're supposed to like spray the drug, the product down, let it dry, and then put the animals, because it's terribly caustic. It may do a good job, but some animals aren't going to even tolerate that contact. So, just got to be careful with that stuff and know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, how, even if it's not doing anything immediately, how much time it's taking off the animal's life if they're being exposed to it.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of variables out there that stuff's not really being studied, that I'm aware of. I've never really seen papers on that subject matter. It's more anecdotal experiences of people, that have used all the products from back in the day, everything from no pest strips and the little film containers in their snake room to the various spray products. I mean, it's no different than what you see in the veterinary field with products to get rid of external parasites in dogs and cats, right? There's stuff that the veterinarians recommend that has been proven safe, and they have it on their patients all the time. And then there's products that you can go buy at Walmart that's way more caustic and way more dangerous because the veterinarians don't use it, or they're basically useless, one or the other. There's a big. It's the same way. I mean, we're putting stuff designed to kill things in contact into animals, and that's a dangerous thing to do. So it's all got to be done carefully.
What do you think about? Because I've talked to numerous people now that are using NexGard to treat mites if they get mites, and it seems to be pretty successful. I know people have used it. A friend of mine, Paul, has used it on his baby scrub pythons that got mites, and it seems pretty promising.
I've heard about it. I haven't tried it. I don't think we carry that product anymore. We did years ago when it first, when it was out earlier, and we've got other products that we utilize now at the clinic. So I don't. I'm not even 100% sure. Are they? Because NexGard comes as like a pill or chewable tablet. I don't remember which it is. And then I'm guessing you pulverize that down into a powder and then mix it in a liquid. Is that how it's being used?
I think that what they're doing is, they're kind of taking off chunks of it in, for the adequate, weight range, and then putting it into a feeder and then feeding the feeder to the snake.
Okay. Yeah. I've not had any experience or tried it before. But I have heard of people using both that and the frontline product, spray stuff to utilize it to try to eradicate this stuff. And so, but I don't have any firsthand experience with either. Just have heard, people comment and say about it and that sort of thing. So I haven't, can't put an opinion down either way. But it sounds like it's in the positive for people utilizing it. I guess there's probably a lot of variables in there as far as dosing and what the tablet is for a dog dosing and how does that relate to a snake dosing.
Yeah.
Versus species, what's a blood python's dose versus a garter snake's dose, et cetera. That sort of stuff. There's a lot of variables of iffiness that, there's got to be worked out, and probably nobody's going to go out of their way to work it out in a good controlled setting.
Yeah, I think that there was one study done. I can't remember where it was. It might have been in Germany. And so that's kind of the study that a lot of veterinarians have utilized to prescribe that off label. And I know that Paul, for instance, because the scrubs were so small, he actually had the NexGard compounded for a dose as small as they needed. The cool thing about it is that it's like one dose and you're done. Like it breaks the life cycle of the mites. You don't have to treat the bedding. You don't have to treat the cages, and it's just they're eradicated.
Wait a minute. That sounds like a stretch. How can if I would have to? I guess I would just have. I'd have to read whatever that paper is to see, because it's one thing if you go and directly kill an adult, sure, by
Yeah.
whatever means, either that through an internal exposure or external spraying, whatever. But there's potentially eggs in the environment. There's females that have
Sure
left the snake to go lay eggs or just happen to be in the immediate environment. That seems like it would be hard to expect a product that's ingested to affect unless it has a long lifespan within the animal.
Yeah.
That if then those animals come back to that animal to feed, are then killed. So maybe if it's got a good lifespan,
I think it's like I think that like so when you use it for your dog, I think it's like a 30-day, you treat every 30 days. But I think that in the snakes it lasts like either 45 to 60 days, that or maybe you do need to do a follow-up dose. And so by the time that 60 days is up, you've effectively broken the life cycle. Hopefully. I mean, I know so Asen Bolstad, he's in Perth, Australia, and he had a mite infestation. And I think he did the initial treatment, it wiped everything out, and then he did a follow-up treatment like 30 or 45 days later. And then after that, like it was done, which is so cool because he didn't have to do anything with his caging or bedding or anything.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like, there's one thing when you're dealing mites, let's say back in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, when people were typically doing more sterile enclosures, on the whole. And I do both, simple enclosures as well as elaborate, depending on the species involved. Um, but yeah, I mean, more people are doing bioactives and all that kind of stuff these days, or at least naturalistic enclosures. And dealing with that can be, near impossible or hugely labor and involved to attempt to eradicate / manage the situation. That's if there is a way, I'll have to try to dig up that paper. If I can't find it, I'm sure
Oh, I can
Zach
get it to you.
Bothman. Yeah, I'd love to read it and hear, because if that's a good effective way, that would be another good tool in the shed. I've used when I've just from when stuff comes in, I've always used a mixture of 1 liter spray bottle, and I use 1 cc of ivermectin with 5 or 6 drops of soap in that, and then fill it up with water. The ivermectin's an oil base, so it doesn't mix well with the soap / water. So anytime you're using it, you just need to keep shaking it up so that it gets caught up in the bubbles of the soap and stuff, and then you just spray the animal down and let it sit. And even particularly sensitive stuff like that, it's like Nerodia and stuff like that, I haven't had any obvious problems by treating anything I've tried treating. I haven't tried my couple of lizards or anything like that, but any snakes, from tree boas to sand boas and water snakes, I haven't had any issues with it, and it's pretty effective. You could spray cages down if need be. You could do whatever, the immediate area around cages. It's pretty effective. And I've done it repeatedly. Like if I had gotten stuff in from somebody where there's a group of snakes and they had mites in them, I'll go back in there every other day and spray them down, spray the cage down that they're in while they're over, in another room in the house. And it does a great job, so I've.
Yeah, that's interesting. Using ivermectin, topically like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's something I've used for a number of years when I looked up trying to find out how people are dealing with it, because I never liked the old school no pest strips and stuff like that, because it's in a room, you're breathing it, and certain species are more sensitive and stuff like that, and some of the other ways, foggers, and you got to move stuff out. None of it's safe. My animals are my house, and I've got dogs, so I got to come up with a safe way. And even though ivermectin, when you use it as a deworming, is very caustic, it's very dangerous. Like you have to dose it very, very specifically to do its job and not kill the snakes involved. But externally, it doesn't seem to have a problem. I've use it routinely on anything coming in the house. So I've been happy with it, and it's easy enough to do. You go get a little bottle of ivermectin from the feed store for 40 something bucks or something like that. Usually 20 mLs or more, and 50 mLs, and lasts for years. You can always keep a spray bottle of this stuff around, and it works. It's always worked well. But if the next guard situation works well, I'm going to definitely look into that. Look at that paper and see what it says, because it's just another tool in the shed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what Dan Valeri uses now, to treat mites. That's his go-to. And he gets it from, I think straight from Australia without a prescription or anything. You can just order it and they ship it right to your house.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I definitely want to read that and get some more input from folks see if I know any folks that have used it and get their input on it as well. It sounds like an interesting option for sure.
Yes, it's surprising. Since I've started doing this podcast, I think I've talked to at least 3 or 4 people that have firsthand used it. And it seems like nothing but success and minimal headaches. I mean, it's just a matter of getting the dosage right. So,
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where just, like it was back in the day, like somebody's got to try these drugs that are made for something else and see if it works, and, cross your fingers and hope it's effective and not lethal and all that stuff. And once in a while we come up with a new option like this. So that's definitely a light in the shed for sure.
How did you get started with snakes and reptiles? What got you into the hobby? When did it start, and with what?
As I've been told, it's been there since I was in the stroller. Yeah, not parents not being able to get me out of the little small reptile house up at the what's the name of that place? Bear Mountain Zoo in the Hudson Valley in New York, where I was as a little kid. Just, I guess, I always had a fascination, and then we moved to Florida when I was young, and just, there's snakes all around, and always, I'm Gen X, so we lived outside essentially, just, get up in the morning, sun comes up, and go outside, and you come back at the end of the day. So I'm always outside. So I'm always being exposed back then as a kid to yellow rat snakes and racers and banded water snakes. And that was, what was around us all the time, and just, had an early fascination with it as a kid, and started keeping fish, because I wasn't allowed to keep any snakes or reptiles in general of any sort in the house. Mom didn't tolerate that. So I did fish principally in elementary school. And then as I got into middle school, started shifting over to a few snakes and lizards and turtles here and there. And then I learned about the Central Florida Herp Society in like seventh grade, I guess it was, from a classmate, and is completely downhill from there. So yeah, once I found the Herp Society in Orlando, that was it. Never missed a meeting. Helped start the Turtle and Tortoise Club of Florida, one of the first members of that. And, it was just, anything I could do to absorb that world was partaken in back then.
My son found one of your snakes escaping at Daytona, and I think you were like, "Oh, that's his 3rd time doing that."
That Glades County AML.
Yeah.
Male. Yeah, he was being a bit of a pill over the weekend. Yeah, I learned a few lessons about bigger snakes at the shows, and because I'm normally just dealing with the little guys, but once in a while I need to, thin out some older stock when I have too many of a particular locality and project. And I had brought a few larger ones, and one of them was just being a challenge over the weekend, and didn't seem to matter what I did. He was like, I'm not doing this. And I had like a cousin of his, like the same size, and they're never moved around, stayed completely still in its big belly, and wasn't a problem. But the one proven male that I had brought is just being a challenge. He was testing me all weekend. And yeah, so
what did you think of Daytona? Was it quiet from what you've normally seen?
It was better than last year. Last year was quiet. Last year was weird. This year was better than last year from, I guess, a crowd and people coming by and stopping by perspective, I guess. But I hadn't vended in years, and last year was the first year I started vending again. So,
Oh, okay.
and I hadn't vended Daytona before. It was literally like my wife kept trying to say, "Hey, you should do it," because we've been going down the past number of years, kind of religiously as kind of a vacay. And I grew up near there, so lots of friends to see. We just made it. She's like, I had just been moving, surplus online, and I decided, is like, screw it, I'll give it a go, see how it works out. And then it coincided, Colubrid Fest started, and I went and I did those both last year. And yeah, I would just say Daytona was a little weird last year. It was a little better this year. Just as far as just, it seemed like crowd size and people buying things and stuff, maybe a little bit better this year. I mean, I didn't really do any better than last year on the whole, but it just seemed a little better this year, at least from my perspective. But I don't really get to get around now that I'm vending. I don't see anything that anybody else is selling or what people have these anymore. So maybe my
Yeah.
perspective isn't as good as you, who was getting to walk around and see everything.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing, just being able to walk around and chit chat with people.
I miss that, but at the same time, most people that either know me or have an interest in what I have stop by anyways. So at least, or I catch up with them afterwards in the evenings and that sort of thing. So I usually get my fill of people. I just don't really get to get a feel of like what's going on market wise, what people are breeding at the moment, what's popular at the moment. I don't get to kind of see what's going on, even if most of those things don't directly affect what I'm working with. It's still, interesting to see what everybody's importing and selling and all that kind of stuff.
How about Colubrid Fest? Is that like your favorite thing to do now?
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's just a completely just different. I mean, we've only had one. We had they had the one last year, and it was a great experience. It was a great experience for everybody that I know of that went. And it's this coming next weekend, a week from now, and I'm looking forward to it. I got to speak at it and do a talk presentation thing last year, and vended, and it was a blast. Had to move it to a different city this year, just for securing the right kind of location and affordable location and stuff like that. So it's a little farther drive this year for me, but it is what it is, part of it. But they're making it, there's a little bit more to it this year. There's a couple extra talks they're now doing on Friday evening, and it just sounds like a lot of people are coming. A lot more breeders are coming from different parts of the country that weren't there last year, and so it sounds like it's going to be a hoot. Like, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be
Nice.
a hard weekend between driving and just lots of people of close, similar, mindsets, to talk to. But like it was last year, it'll just be on a
Yeah.
bigger scale. It seems like this year. So it's just
What
a
did
good experience, at least for what I like out of going to an event, because it's really more of an event than what a show is. It's not like Daytona.
Yeah.
Completely different.
What did you talk about last year?
Uh, uh, Locality breeding. Zach tends to design talks rather than, like, last year. I also spoke at IHS up in Knoxville, and I did a talk there on mangrove salt marsh snakes, captive husbandry, and as well as uh, natural history related stuff to them. It was a focused talk, but Zach tends to like to have talks that are less focused, more general, that can appeal. The subject matter can appeal to people, in more of a general way, and it's also very interactive. You do your little bit of a talk, but it's a very interactive, asking questions, replying, and all of the talks the whole day is that way. So it was more just on locality breeding and my approach, thoughts, intents, all that kind of stuff, and being able to interact with people on how that process works for me. So it was cool. It was interesting. You get to instead of just talking straight to people, it's a little more interactive, and
Yeah.
just, and I get to kind of put my passion towards my approach to what I do um, out there to try to maybe infect some more people into having, maybe a little bit more passion about what they're doing rather than just, I've got a cool, pretty snake and I'm going to breed some more pretty snakes kind of approach, which I've got pretty snakes, but that's subjective.
Where does that passion come from for you for locality animals? Why is that important to you?
It's just being a field herper person since I was a little kid, and love being out in the field. I love, getting to see, all these, whether it's salamanders or rat snakes or box turtles, whatever it happens to be. I love getting to see these animals, in the field in their natural habitat and understanding what those little niche areas look like. And then why maybe this rat snake 50 miles in the other direction looks completely different. What's different about that habitat? Why, what pressures are there that make that animal need to be this slightly different color or this slightly different pattern and all that. And to me, that's just like, it's fascinating. Even though we're, as humans, multiplying and developing and taking away all that habitat, there's, at the moment, we still have some of that around. So, getting to see these animals out in the field and getting to see those micro habitat and mega habitat differences is just, it's amazing just getting to get out in that habitat. And so bringing that into my captive husbandry work is just what it's all about to me. Just being able to show that, hey, this rat snake here in my yard is different than the rat snake that's an hour this other direction, an hour the other direction, or 5 hours that way, or, that sort of a thing. They all, they may be considered by taxonomic grouping for the moment or in the past or whatever the case may be, the same thing, but, they're different. They look different, and they look different for reasons of, where they've, managed to survive for a long time. So that's really what it comes down to me. And then being able to learn what those different phenotypes and stuff look like and develop like in captivity. I mean, people for decades now have kind of learned, okay, this little baby red rat snake, this little albino, or this little hypo, or this little whatever. Okay, it looks like this is a baby, and as an adult, it turns into this. Well, I'm doing that same thing with yellow rat snakes from different parts of the range. Well, this yellow rat snake from here looks like this, but the ones 2 hours the other direction, the babies look different. The same thing with banded water snakes, and the same thing with saltmarsh snakes. They vary across their range, and to me, that those differences are just amazing and fascinating. And learning about those differences and how they develop and how they work in captivity is just what it's all about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about taxonomy and the way that things change, as time goes on?
I mean, we develop techniques, right? We develop techniques to better do things, right? It doesn't matter whether it's taxonomy or other things. We find ways to do things better, whether it's learning about our own personal genetic makeup, that we can learn how to find diseases within us, or, with them, they find ways to separate, clump, divide, whatever it may be. Sometimes it seems like those published works maybe weren't done the way everybody thinks they should have been done. The results weren't what everybody may agree with. Other papers, depending on the species, like, people are cool with. And maybe some of those results will get changed because new technology is available in 10 years or 20 years, whatever the case may be, to be able to do it slightly differently or slightly better, or have it be a slightly different tool in the belt to be able to evaluate that. Right now it's been chaotic. You spit it, particularly in colubrids, whether you're dealing with Lamprepeltis or Pantherophis. It's been, even in Nerodia with Erythrogaster, it's gone through some hoops in the past 20 years. And do I like it? Do I don't like it? It is what it is. I can not like it. It doesn't matter, but a lot of these things I can take, just give you a scientific name for a yellow rat snake, and I can give you 3 or 4 different names, and they're all correct depending on who you talk to, and they're all correct to some people as they are, and that's annoying and challenging, I guess. So, I take it for what it is. I am very adamant about using localities with all my projects, and a lot of times only minimally using the token, taxonomic grouping, or even the color. I stick with a common color for the names. It's a yellow rat, it's black rat, it's whatever. I mean, I tend to leave some of those a little bit more simple, and sure, I'm aware of where the taxonomy sits, and I'm aware of the papers that have been published, and I have to use them because I have to put it on my outside of my boxes. I have to use it on the paperwork for exporting. I got to use that stuff, but at the same time, I could use 3 or 4 of them on a paperwork to export, and none of them are wrong, really. And you never know what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Inspector is used to seeing, or how many different ones he considers to be the same thing. It just is what it is, and it's frustrating for basically everybody, at least in herpetoculture for sure. And from what I can tell, it's frustrating to people in the academic world as well. So, it is what it is. I take it like a grain of salt.
Yeah. When you say exporting, do you mean out of the state or out of the country?
Out of the country.
Oh, okay. So where are you exporting to, and what's that process like?
I usually ship to Canada once or twice a year. Usually ship over to Europe a time or 2 or more a year, just kind of depending.
Okay.
I deal with class 3 animals, so it's pretty simple. We go through middleman exporters. There's companies out there like Dutch Dragon and Colubra, Reptile Industries, Reptiles Express. There's a number of companies that provide those services for our industry, and basically, it's pretty simple when you're dealing with species like I do. And I deal with it minimally. The people that pay that are acquiring any animals from me, they're really dealing with the brunt of it. I mean, I'm interacting with the company that's doing it, but for me, it's literally just filling out a sheet of paper of the number of specimens and common name and scientific name of what's involved with the export, and getting the animals to that exporter's U.S. facility to then get grouped up with other animals from other breeders and such to then get exported to wherever it's going. It's not it's expensive for the person on the other end. It's not terribly difficult for me. It's a little annoying at times because some of these companies tend to be kind of last minute with their notifications, and it's like, oh, it's Wednesday afternoon, I need you to ship on Monday, and it's a bunch of snakes. Or, oh, I need you to ship the one I just shipped some stuff to go over to Europe the week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I literally got told as I was getting in the car and heading to work that I needed to ship. And this was like a Monday morning, and I needed to have them there the next day in Florida.
Wow.
Yeah. Some of these companies don't, there's a company or two out there that are pretty really good. They have got all their ducks in a row, and it's planned out 2 weeks in advance. You know exactly all the details. And other ones, it's like you find out 2 or 3 days in advance type stuff. All the companies are a little different. And I don't pick the companies. The person buying the animals takes that risk of hiring these companies to bring these animals across borders.
Oh, wow.
So I can guarantee live arrival to those exporters, but I'm not hiring those people. So once it gets into their hands, it's their stuff and their issue. So, I mean, for the most part, it all goes just fine, but there's, some of these animals can take a week or two, depending, usually take a week from when they leave to me to get to the other person, and in some cases they tend to do, like in Europe, a lot of the exports are surrounding either Hoot and Show or Ham Show. And sometimes there's one of those that tends to lay around one of our major holidays. So you end up shipping like on a Monday, and it doesn't go out because of the way the holiday sits. The show is until like 2 weekends out away. And so it's like this long layover before the people on the other end actually get their animals in hand. So it's less than ideal when you're typically sending over, less than 6-month-old baby snakes, that maybe well started, but still, it's worrisome, but,
Yeah.
it tends to go fine, so it's, But it's pretty easy when you're dealing with this stuff. When you're dealing with class 2s and you got other permits and stuff, I don't have experience in that. But fortunately, the stuff I work with are common stuff that aren't regulated in major ways. So it's a pretty simple process in a nutshell.
So you're really at the mercy of those middlemen, though, as far as
100%. 100%. Yeah. And like I said, there's been some folks that have gotten stuff from me, particularly over in Europe, that are, that the companies that they'd used at those times. So it was very great. It was great. Like, we had the paperwork finalized 2 weeks in advance. Like, I had a 2-week window. I knew exactly when I needed to ship and the dates and the times of it, when stuff was going to go, and I have plenty of window to have my box ready, and all the little deli cups, everything has to be labeled individually. Everything has to be contained individually and labeled very specifically as far as species, common names, who it's going to, who it's coming from. All very specific details have to be on each container. So when it's inspected prior to export, it's very easy for the inspectors to evaluate everything that's involved in getting exported. And in other places, it's like I find out 3 or 4 days in advance, and it's a bit of an annoying shuffle. And I tend to make videos anytime I have stuff crossing borders and going through these middlemen. I make videos of all the animals in their delis, the way they're labeled, the boxes, all the paperwork. I have everything videoed because they're going through somebody that I don't know. I'm not shipping directly to the other person. So that I've got some proof of how the box was packed, how everything is labeled, all that kind of stuff,
Wow.
as just an insurance situation for myself more than anything else. And I send that to
like
the person that's paying them. Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of people that don't want to touch it, don't want to bother with it. And I can understand why, because it's annoying. I tend to have to sit on animals for a while. I've got a couple snakes sitting here right now that I'm waiting to get up to Canada. A handful of water snakes to a buddy up there. And the guy that he uses it's a Tinley. I ship up to Tinley. And then he comes down from Canada and does the import by crossing the border that way.
Wow.
So I'm sitting on animals for a few months right now, waiting to get to him. But at the same time, like, I have a lot of passion for what I'm doing, my projects that I'm breeding, and the animals that I'm producing, and the fact that people far away, in other countries, across ponds, far away, they want to work with some of the stuff I work with that I produce. I'm like, it's flattering. It's freaking cool. It's amazing. So, it's, I don't have necessarily the same passion when I have, like, my baby carpet pythons or something like that I do for my baby water snakes, my baby rat snakes. There's a lot of pride in those offspring. And so when people overseas, are willing to not just pay for my animals, pay for the shipping to the exporter, and then pay for that exporter to get those animals over to them, that's pretty cool. So I'm kind of willing to put up with it as long as the people are amenable to deal with. Some people expectations aren't realistic, or, I'm just not going to bend over backwards, but, plenty of people are, and I'm happy to put the extra effort into making it a fruitful process for them to get what I'm working with. So,
how long have you been into Nerodia and keeping them?
I kept them initially, let's see, back in the early 90s. That was my first kind of attempt at messing with them. Learned very quickly how not to keep them in that little window of time. You can't keep them like king snakes and the rat snakes that I was messing with at the time.
How so?
And then basically they have to be well ventilated. They don't like moisture, humidity in their enclosures. They don't like dampness in their enclosures. They have to just be in like under ideal circumstances, they need to be in like an aquarium with a screen lid, in a dry enclosure with just a water bowl. Like, I don't use aquariums because they're just heavy and they break and they're annoying. But that's sort of a concept. They just need, if just like I can have baby snakes that just go and turn over the water bowls because I'll raise babies in groups, and they'll go mess up the water, and make their substrate get damp and stuff like that. And I've had whole litters just because they went and had a field day and made a mess, and I'm busy for a day or two and I haven't checked that particular bin, and they'll go and get blisters, and then I'll lose that whole litter over a few week time. So I learned back in the day that, like, these little homemade speaker box cabinets that we made back in the early 90s. And we had our little hard plastic, sweater boxes that we slid into these drawers and these cabinets that we made with just a couple holes on the side didn't work for Nerodia. I learned that very quickly. And so a few years later, while in the zoo field, we had a lot of native species on exhibit up here, and through having to use those both in naturalistic exhibit situations and maintaining them off exhibit, I learned, particularly there, what worked and what didn't work. Right, like, oh, I can just keep them really simple in this Nerodia cage on newspaper with a hide box and a water bowl, and they do great as long as I can get them eating. Okay, well, that's good. Having them in this big enclosure with a bunch of other species, some of which eat them, their stresses induced to the situation, not as ideal, right? Like, I learned some basic things, and then years later, back in early mid 20 teens, I started to get back after a break for a few years of keeping anything at home. I took a break and I had gotten on social media. Literally, it was social media that spurred me into working with what I'm working with now, because I realized that I was able to find other people that had niche interests that like I have, and I didn't have to rely completely on trying to move any offspring or find people with the same interests within a distance or radius of where I live, right? Like, I didn't have to rely on the handful of shows that I could drive to have somebody have an interest in some baby banded water snakes that I had or whatever, I was instantly able to connect with people all around the world. And I was like, I can go down this road and I can show people like how cool these are and how straightforward their husbandry can be. And at that point, it was really me embarking on figuring out and exactly what I needed to do husbandry wise, because I hadn't messed with any Nerodia in probably 10 or 15 years, I guess, maybe. I don't know, somewhere in that, probably somewhere in that neighborhood. And it just through field herping, I'm seeing bandits and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go down this road and I'm going to show people like why I think they're cool. And I'm going to breed them and I'm going to learn about them. And I'm going to prove to people that like, these aren't like some just trash snakes that, are at best worth ignoring, that there's a lot of coolness to them and that their husbandry isn't some complicated, crazy thing. And you can't keep them in water. You don't have to have this crazy setup, and you just don't have to sit there and feed them live fish and frogs and stuff like that. Like I can show them that the husbandry needs for these animals is basically not much different than what they should be doing with their other colubrids, and so I went down that road with one particular locality where we used to go show dogs at. I haven't been down to that place in a few years now, but and it's been kind of downhill. I started keeping a few rat snakes through a buddy of mine that had field herped with, that is basically a locality rat snake guy, just not in the hobby. He's just a field herper guy that keeps rat snakes. And I was already starting to keep a few rat snakes at that point, and decided to go down the road in Nerodia, and haven't looked back. And it tends to dominate me mentally, and changing the percentages of what I keep too as well. It's the Nerodia just keep taking over because I just find more and more interest and reason to focus on them more. Even though I love my rat snakes, I love my Nerodia more. So
that's pretty wild. I didn't expect to hear that Nerodia don't like moist, damp environments, because when you see them out in the wild, they're usually right near the water. So what's the deal with that? If
you look at one, if you have one in your hand, you look at them, right? Like they're as an animal, they're really not much different than if you put a garter snake or a pine snake in your hand, right? Like there's keeled scales. There's nothing different. Versus if you go and get, let's say, a mud snake or a glossy crayfish snake or a rainbow snake, one of those types of species, or even rainbow boas, if you look at the difference of where the scalation and the skin is on those animals live constantly in a wet situation. Nerodia aren't. Nerodia are animals that utilize aquatic environments to find food and to seek shelter from a predator. There's plenty of places like that I go to as go-to spots for seeing Nerodia or looking for Nerodia, where like I have a token time like at sunset where I know they're going to instantly become active, roughly, neighborhood wise, but instantly become active. And they haven't been in the water all day, right? They're coming from hide areas up on land and going to the water to then go look for food, right? They've been sitting all day long in some bush, leaf litter, hidey place, whatever area, or they've been sitting up in a tree over the water, right? Sitting there all day long, just basking up, curled up in a branch. There's a creek down the street from my house that I've hiked many, many times over the years, and there's lots of midlands in there, some diamondback waters, some yellow belly waters. But like those snakes have very particular, like there may be bushes and branches all along this clear rocky sandy creek, but there's only like set places where those guys will go up and sit up in these trees. It's not just anywhere. It's areas where if a predator, whatever, is coming, a threat comes near them, they can plop straight in the water and go into the bank up in the root bases and be safe.
Yeah.
And not all the places where bushes are along the shoreline have that same thing. So they're very, they're very specific on what they're going to utilize. And so because of that, you realize that these animals are just utilizing this environment. They've found a food source to utilize, fish and frogs, depending on the age of the animal and the species involved. They found areas around the water to in or out of the water to be able to get away from a predator, whatever, bird, people, turtle, whatever. But they're not aquatic animals. Like they have no tolerance. I mean, it's hard to appreciate it in a wild setting, but you go and you put them in a box, and I don't care what kind of box you do, big box, little box, glass enclosure, PVC, like you're going to learn pretty quickly that very few of them have much of a tolerance for a moist, humid environment. And people that have success keeping them and breeding them long term are people that basically keep them simple. And like my rat snake enclosures and my water snake enclosure are the exact same enclosures, exactly the same. The only difference is the rat snakes have a hide box with peat moss in it all year round as a nest box or a moist hide if they choose to. Husbandry practices in complete suboc basically talk about the needs, what Trans-Pecos rats need. And it's, a very airy cage, very dry cage, using, a wood substrate that helps draw moisture out of the air so that, again, those guys who are from an arid region are breathing non-humid air. And for me, living in the Southeast, well, humidity, even in air-conditioned house, is higher than what it's going to be out west or in other parts of the country, and so being able to try to manage that humidity, I took basically from what I was doing, learning about keeping subocs with, and I just applied it directly to all of my colubrid husbandry. It's basically a dry, well-ventilated enclosure, lots of air holes, tops, bottom, side. Well, not bottom, but all sides and tops, and just have everything be just super well ventilated so that you're just not trapping all that moisture, which in turn grows funguses, grows bacteria, all that sort of stuff, and just being able to try to keep that environment as dry as we can to just make it be healthy. And so that's basically what I plugged into my recipe for keeping any of these guys, and constantly tweaking it and improving it along the way, and also trying to do it in an affordable fashion.
It's so interesting what you were saying about just like the natural environment that the Nerodia kind of fit into, because I see them all the time at work, right? And the time when I actually see them the most is during the winter, which is funny because they need to bask, right? So they're up in these bushes and shrubs. And I remember thinking, like, are they like communal? Because it's like, you don't see them around 90% of the pond. And then in this one area, they are everywhere. But now what you said makes sense, that it's just prime real estate, right? So that they're in a shrub that's over the water. So as soon as I come up on them, they all plop into the water and they're gone. Like as soon as I'm within 20 feet of them, they're gone.
Yeah. There's a reason. It's more of a tolerance for one another than actually like as much of a social communal thing like we think as as a mammal. It's more of just they're willing to tolerate each other because that particular bush and the angle of the sun and the escape routes and whatever, they're to the liking of a bunch of them, right? So because of that, they can hang out in the same area, and they utilize those situations. It's very classic. Just over the years of hiking the same creek down the street from my house, it's the same way. It's like I know where I'm going to stop and where I'm most likely going to see a midland water snake sitting up in the branches. It's not going to be during this, couple 100 yards right here, but over there on the right, and down a little farther on the left, it'll be. It's the same way with a couple banded spots I have back home in Florida. It's like almost a recipe to find them, and each area's got its own little, its own little differences, for being able to see them, view them, find them, whatever. But if you know a particular area, you can see these patterns and these habits of these animals, and be able to take that understanding of what you're seeing and being able to apply it to captive husbandry practices.
Now, when you're collecting, are you collecting adult animals, or do you try to go for the smallest, youngest animals you can find?
It depends. I prefer like juvenile, subadult, young adult window. Rarely, and I say rarely, but not never, will I get an older, mature animal, be it rat or water. Just because those tend to be the ones that are less likely to, or the ones more likely to, I guess would be the right way. More likely, if I'm going to have a problem establishing, it's more likely going to be an older animal because they're very fixed in their ways, less malleable, uh, their needs. And so younger animals tend to be a little bit better, but I have collected a few older animals, particularly in water snakes, and they do fine most of the time. And more of it has to do with times of the year when I collect. I've learned there's certain times of the year that are better to collect than others, because particularly as you get up out of like north of Central Florida, and you start getting areas where we have a little bit more set seasons, where it gets cooler and these animals, are paying attention to and aware of the photo periods and know how that relates to cold temperatures coming in. You start getting a little bit north where we start having cooler temperatures like we do up here. These animals come fall time are turned off. Like if you go and collect an animal in say October or even early November, despite the fact you can find them, they're already turning off from eating. And so you're going to go bring them into captivity and try to get them to eat. And their brain is saying, no, I can't do that for a couple months because the environment and the situation isn't right. The climate isn't right. You end up losing that battle more times than not. So I tend to focus more on spring and early summer if I'm going to go down, if I'm going to collect some stock from a particular area or go back to an area where I'm already working with a project to get some fresh blood for the project. I'll tend to focus on early time of the year where their brains are wired to like, I need to eat, I got to breed, I got to get feeding again, I got to get my weight up, that kind of thing. It's taking advantage again of knowing their wild habits to then being able to apply for better success. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't catch an animal in the spring that isn't going to adapt well, because it happens sometimes, and it may happen for reasons that are outside of your efforts. They may already be burdened with issues that are outside of your control. Their stresses, at that point, particularly if you're going just into breeding season, some males are just like their brains are already wired in a way, and you bring them into captivity and change stress loads, and they're wired for breeding and not eating during that time, and then getting them established tends to not work sometimes too. So it's a little bit of a balance. But for the most part, your husbandry, and most of them all do pretty well when I bring in new stock. So
it kind of reminds me of what you were saying before about the trials and tribulations that people went through with short-tail pythons in the beginning. That
Sure.
since they were finding them in really wet environments, they were keeping them really wet, and then
Keeping them too
finding
hot.
that too hot, too wet. Are Nerodia sort of like what looking at keeping them from a husbandry standpoint, what is sort of their temperature ranges that you look for?
I mean, for me, like again, my room where I keep all my rats and waters, it's like it just stays around 80. Like I don't have like, I'm not super anal about. I know what the room needs to feel like, just like me walking in the room, and I can just. I don't even know if I have a thermometer sitting in there at the moment, but I have in the past to be able to monitor them. I don't even think I bring my temp gun in there. I use my temp gun out here on these guys. I just know what 80-ish feels like, and that's my goal. They stay anywhere from upper 70s, and then on really hot days, if I've got the window, a little bit open, and the fan is pulling the heat in, it may get into the low 80s a little bit for a portion of the afternoon. But 80-ish. That's kind of my go-to temp.
Okay.
Just anywhere in that 5-degree range, around that, is kind of my 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 target. And just for the way the cages are and the way the room sits, with the window kind of running in the middle of the room and cages being to the left and right, for the most part, like the middle of the room with the fan bringing any heat in from outside, unless the heat's on in the wintertime, then it's a slightly different game. But they'll that if I actually have the window open, depends on how hot it is outside. The front of the cages where I'm seeing animals and where the water bowls are, that tends to be slightly warmer than the backside of the cages up against the wall, away from where that airflow goes. So it does create a bit of a thermal environment, a thermal gradient in those cages, just from the way the room flows between the air conditioner blowing on. I have the window open, the fan blowing through there, and then the wintertime, I've got the heater blowing in there, the heat blowing in from the central heat, So they end up getting a bit of a gradient just naturally, just based on cages, positioning in the room. But 80-ish, that's my goal. That's
Okay.
my goal for all of them. And I even actually do all my young carpets are in there at that ambient as well. Some of them may have a little heat underneath them, but most of them are just in ambient in the same cages, same way I set up my rat snakes.
Wow. So no hot spots or anything.
No, none of my colubrids have hot spots. I have had out here in some of these cages at one point before I kind of went down a ridiculous popcorn carpet rabbit hole. I did have a few out here. I did some mixed species exhibit. I actually did one of these big 4x2x2s. I did a kind of a visual replication of the St. John's River shoreline where some of my yellow rat snake stock had come from, and essentially the same environment that one of my localities, abandoned water snakes from the same town area, is from. There's driftwood in there and palm fronds and all that stuff. I had yellow rat snakes and banded water snakes from the same area, all in the same cage and stuff. But the one thing with doing these naturalistic enclosures, it's great for I've got live plants and put in plants, fresh browse type plants in with these carpets and other things. They poop like once a month and they don't move around a lot. So it's a lot easier to try to successfully maintain an enclosure, an animal that's like that, versus rat snakes and water snakes who just like constantly defecate because you're feeding them routinely, and it constantly makes it basically making their enclosure dirty. So being able to maintain a healthy, clean environment is much harder in a naturalistic or even bioactive type enclosure than what you can do with pythons and boas that poop once a month.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so much easier to spot clean.
Yeah, it's way easier. Like I joke with some friends at Daytona. I'm like, it's like they're almost a relief. Like I barely have to do anything with them. A handful of times a year and clean the cage every once in a while, and like there's not much to them. Meanwhile, I'm in there several hours a day outside of work, working in with the rats and the waters. Changing water bowls, spot cleaning, doing whatever. Constantly in there managing because metabolisms are different, lifestyles and husbandry needs are different, and trying to maintain a nice big pretty enclosure with colubrids, particularly the type of colubrids I do, it's although possible, it's a lot of work, and because of what my goals and objectives are, it's a little impractical for the most part. If I move out a few things that I've got out of these cages, there's a chance I may move a couple colubrids into a mixed species exhibit again out here. But I got a few projects that just hanging around at the moment and don't don't have a long-term plan with. And if those cages get freed up down the road, they'll probably move a couple of things out here. But at the moment, the cages aren't available. So
is it possible to keep Nerodia in like a large showcase enclosure with a water feature that they could utilize so you could see that behavior from them? Or would you really need to make sure that they have a dry, arid place to be able to escape to?
The environment, it would have to be well balanced and well managed to be able to pull it off. Because the one thing with Nerodia too is they defecate a lot, right? They have a very high metabolism, like garbage snakes do. They are messy animals, and they like to defecate in the water. So any sort of a water feature you're going to go and put in there, in that enclosure, is going to be constantly defecated in. Most of the defecation they do is in their water bowls. So how do you do that and actually keep a sanitary environment in a cage? Like, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I don't want to try to do it. Like, I've seen zoos do it. And when I've seen zoos do it, literally they have like a concrete basin with a drain in the bottom. So they can just pull the plug from below, open the valve, drain it out, clean it out properly, rinse it back out properly, and fill it back up. That's doable. And they're probably doing that on a daily basis or a couple times a week as needed, depending on, feeding habits, feeding cycles of those animals and defecation cycles. But, for me, like, most of my work is literally just changing out water bowls and cleaning water bowls. Like, I pull them and all my water bowls go into garbage cans in the driveway and they get hand scrubbed and then they get soaked either in bleach or ammonia solutions for an extended period of time, hours to overnights. And that's just because they're messy. They're great, so cool, and I love them, but it's, they're colubrids and they're not carpet pythons that don't make messes.
Yeah, that's why I love pythons so much.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, my python collection and boa collection has grown dramatically over the past couple of years. Usually, just opportune situations. The few things I've intentionally bought just because I used to work with the species and stuff, and I wanted to work with them again. And others are just like, oh, friend's got this pair or these babies, and I'm like, and we, they're interested in trade, and I'm like, sure, let's give it a go. Let's play with them again, or give that species a try, and I mess with them. But my focus on them is much different than it is with my rats on my water projects.
What kind of boas do you keep?
Interest. I've got those black-tailed tree boas. I still have a few males left. I ended up getting a bunch when they were showing up back in 22. And of the, I think 3.2 I purchased, I ended up with 5 males. So that was cool. And acquiring them is not easy. I know people with them and they don't want to let go, or babies, females are going to take 6 and 7 years to grow up and they're expensive and outside of what I'm willing to spend. And so I've had them posted. I've moved 1 or 2, but I still got a couple of boys left to move if the opportunity presents itself. What else do I got boa wise? I've got 2 species of sand boas. I've got Indian sand boas, and I've got the Russian sand boas, Eryx miliaris. I've got some of those. I've also got a locality of true red tails from an island locality on the coast of Guyana.
Oh, nice.
Had some of those that a buddy had produced last year. I had 2 pairs, and 1 pair's with a buddy, and I just held on to 1 pair. I think that's it for boas. Yeah.
And what do you have as far as pythons?
Lots of Papuans, lots of Papuan carpets. 1 Timor at the moment, eventually to become more as opportunities present themselves in a affordable manner, and some olives, and I think that's it for pythons at the moment. Yeah.
No white lips?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got both species of white lips. Well, both
Oh,
I have both
nice.
northerns and southerns. I forget about the white lips. I keep them temperate, basically, in with the rat snakes and water snakes. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I got northerns and southerns now. I got picked up a pair of southerns this summer. Again, I had worked with some of those years ago, back when I was breeding white lips back in the early 2000s. I was breeding northerns, and when I got rid of everything back then, I realized I really like that species. They're very hands off, don't want to be bothered, don't want to be messed with, they want to be completely left alone, which is just fine. I'm down with it.
Yeah.
They're beautiful when I do actually see them every once in a while. You know, I initially had some of them out here, some of the northerns out here, and basically I never saw them. They never utilized their heat source, but maybe a couple of times, and all the time I ever saw them. So I was like, I'm going to put you in the snake room and see how that goes. And like, they're doing great. They're
Mm.
they're not a species that likes a lot of heat anyway. They like it on the cooler side. They tend to be like moisture situations and all that kind of stuff. So they like it on the cooler side. They've been doing great ambiently and with the rats and the waters in there. So yeah, I've got a couple northerns, a couple southerns at the moment. So
How do you, I meant to ask you this before. How do you catch the Nerodia? I mean, they are so tuned in to what is happening around them that, I mean, they're the only time I can get them when I'm at work is if they are on flat ground and I can just run faster than they can on flat ground, or if they're on a road, it's a
yeah,
lot easier. But man, if they're near a body of water, you are SOL. Like I'm not getting close to them.
yeah, yeah. Usually it's at night with flashlights. That's one of the most effective ways to find them and catch them. And usually under those circumstances, particularly with some ridiculously bright headlight or hand lamp in my hand, they tend to freeze. And so I can usually hand grab them in the water. I usually have a big,
Mm.
long 6 foot dip net with me as well. If I'm in a place where I'm walking shorelines or creeks or whatever. Um, and when they're in environments where I know they're basking, like if it's a during the day hike sort of thing, like the creek down the street from my house, I'll carry my dip net and then try to have that underneath them when I attempt to grab them. More times than not, it's hand grabbing. I found that to be the more effective way of attempting to get one in my hand, either just to see it, photograph it, or if it's something I'm going to work with, because they tend to shuck nets pretty well in the water.
Do you have
Yeah,
any green water snakes?
I do not. They have proven, both through my efforts and the efforts of others, to be very difficult to establish and maintain in captivity.
Really?
Um, I've tried both species of greens, and I have failed both with babies that were out of rabid females and wild caughts, and like they seem to do great. I can get them on the rodents. They seem like they're fine, and then like 8 or 10, 12 months later, they just start fading and they crash. And I haven't revisited it in several
Mm.
years now, quite a few years since before COVID. I haven't gone back to dealing with them because it's just I've had similar results, and most of the people I know. I know one buddy that had success keeping one Florida green for several years. He'd had it. He offered it to me, and he'd already had it for over 3 years. But he had put a lot of money and a lot of work with a veterinarian to deparasitize that animal. It had
Uh,
really stubborn stuff that just couldn't be gotten rid of easily, and he earned that animal being a long term captive. And unfortunately, he wasn't in a position where he was breeding or doing anything more with him. And I know that animal went to another buddy of his, and I
mm.
just didn't want to take the risk at the time, knowing my track record with those two species, to take that animal from him and then try to get some more animals to do something with them. So I haven't gone back down that road. Maybe one day I will, but haven't to date. Haven't in quite a few years now.
Yeah, we have a lot of greens and a lot of bandeds at my work,
Mm-hmm.
and the greens are pretty cool. I caught one going from one pond to another one night, and I just walked up, and it actually I got it to calm down and just like come into my hand. and I was
Yeah.
able to pick it up and take some pictures. And I was doing my best not to grab it and get mussed and bitten, so I just kind of moved really slowly, and it kind of mellowed out quickly and actually came onto my hand.
That's the way, like, that's the way most of them are. They just have a very natural flight response, and respond to a predator. I mean, we're a predator. We get up near them, they think they're going to get eaten, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
these guys have a natural, set of behaviors to survive. So, but like, I mean, I've got some, a new water snake project I started back in early April, and like I had them on unscented hairless mice within 3 or 4 feedings, and they're baby tame, like
Mm.
super laid back animals. And one of them is like pushing, it's a 5 foot big female, like
Wow.
great snakes, super chill. You know, it's I've been slowly working over the years, over the past at least 10 years now, to change people's mindset of what Nerodia are, and
Mm.
what they can what they can what they do, what they can be like as captives in husbandry. Like everybody just focuses on the kings and the rats and some extent garters too. And I'm like, yeah, there's a whole other group of a bunch of species and a lot of variation across the ranges, you know, of Nerodia that are pretty cool stuff. Lots of pretty stuff, ugly stuff, unique stuff, just cryptic looking stuff. Across the easternish half of the U.S. and down into Mexico. They're pretty cool stuff. You know.
Can you do they ever hybridize out in the wild?
Trying to think if I've seen. I mean, okay. Let me. That's a subject based on how we deal with taxonomy. That is a little dicey, right? Some stuff that maybe was subspecies from one another 50 years ago are now different
Mhm.
species from one another. And so things like banded water snakes, they mix freely with salt marsh snakes across their entire range. Where salt marshes start in Volusia County, Florida, all the way around to Corpus Christi, but they also range down into the Keys and all the way down to the northern coast of Cuba. But
Wow.
anywhere near the mainland, salt marshes mix with fasciata. So you get a lot of variation because of that. And depending on how much outflow in those particular areas where you might be looking has with fresh water, affects how big that animal's going to be, what the pattern is, what their color is, because it depends on how much interaction that they've had with the genes from banded water snakes. So you go down into the Keys or you get into barrier islands that are farther away from the shore, and you get salt marsh snakes that are much smaller, um, and less. I say less variable, but less variable on the grand scheme of things, right? You get a lot more variation when they're mixed with bandits because you get a different complex of patterns and colors coming into the animals, into the offspring, I guess technically, than what you're going to get where you don't have that influence of fasciata. So um, that's one instance where bandits and salt marshes, and there's probably more work to be done with that and the relationship. But at one time years ago, those were under Natrix and they were under Cypodon, and they were just different subspecies. Or they were all just different subspecies under a
Mm.
different taxonomic grouping back in the 40s, 50s, that sort of thing, and before that. And then as we learn and people put effort into dividing things up in different ways, well, then we separate them off here and separate them off there. Bandits are also known to intergrade. Fasciata is known to intergrade with Nerodia Cypodon, the northern water, midland water, across the southern states. So midlands and bandits interact along the Florida-Alabama line and Mississippi, Louisiana line. There's a couple of papers, primarily out of Auburn University, that Dr. Mount had done evaluating those integrate. I have not seen any of those. I've wanted to go out of my way to try to see some of those and see um, evaluate those. See what they're about. more, but haven't. They're just kind of in areas where I don't tend to go and don't know people in the area and don't know where to go. It just kind of hasn't ever happened. So yeah, they do. They do. They do in some cases. Big differences like the way how different greens are and diamondbacks and browns from let's say bandeds and northerns and stuff like that. Yeah, I've never heard really about any of those mixing, but some of these other ones that are more closely related evolutionarily, yeah, they do seem to have mixes in areas where habitat is suitable for both. Basically, is really what it comes down to. Like the bandits tend to need a habitat that's more sandy and low, but as the habitat for the Midlands comes out of the uplands and then the rocky, gravelly bottom habitat and starts turning into the sandy bottom habitats along the lower coastal plains, habitats kind of overlap in areas. And so you tend to see apparently, mixing of what we have established as species, separate species. So the old rules for what established a species and what makes an integrate and what makes a hybrid are kind of all out the window in the past number of decades because those rules don't apply as they had once in the past. So yes, technically they do mix, but it's subjective and different opinions as far are they hybrids, are they integrades, are they how closely related are they really, and we maybe just have them separated. There's a lot of thoughts and opinions out there about some of that as to really where those relationships truly are.
Yeah, just seeing the greens and the banded so close to each other where I work, I often wonder, I'm like, I wonder if they ever hybridize.
I think with some of those species where you have big evolutionary differences between greens and bandeds, I mean, they look very different, right?
Yeah.
They're structurally very different. It's like, that's kind of like saying, do anacondas and red-tailed boas breed, cross down in, Suriname or Guyana? Probably not. They're kind of very different animals, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at abandoned water and like a midland water, like structurally, they're pretty similar. Their patterns really aren't that different. The habitat, they inhabit similar ecosystems, just slightly different, right? Feeding on similar food items. So they're really not that different. You start getting some of the greens and the browns and the diamondbacks. Those animals are built different. Their eyes are set forward. Their hunting, goals are different. Their hunting styles are different. You've got animals that evolved along different lines. And so I think it's much less of a chance that some of those guys are going to mix as opposed to the salt marshes, the bandeds, and the common water snakes are going to mix. So
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's wild how hardy they are. I mean, I've seen ones that look like they've been run over. Like you can tell they just have sections of broken ribs that have healed where they're like, they have these sharp angles on their side and everything. And we had one that one of the guys I work with rescued it from the lift station well. So it was sitting in sewer. I mean, it had rubber bands and stuff around its body, and he cut everything off of it and rinsed it off, and he went and let it go. And yeah, I mean, they're pretty. They seem like they're extraordinarily hardy animals.
Yeah, a lot of reptiles really have shown that despite what they get exposed to from our essentially neglect and harm, some pretty hardy resilience, in some cases. Obviously, some not, but definitely some. You see turtles that have been either painted or had, constricted stuff around them, and they've managed to keep living for years in this deformed sort of capacity and eke out an existence. And I've caught water snakes that, have had, holes healed up in them where they either been bit by something or they'd eaten a catfish and the catfish spines went through them, that sort of things, and you can see where they've had some pretty insane trauma to them. And yet they pushed through it and managed, despite being in a wild circumstance, not sterile environment and that kind of stuff, with antibiotics and all those sort of things, They still manage to to push forward and try to pass their genes on, essentially.
Despite us and the things we do
Despite
to their
us,
environment.
despite us, it's all despite us.
Yeah, I know it's super sad, especially the area I'm in Florida. There's so much development going on, and it's really depressing seeing it and just knowing the amount of habitat loss.
Yeah,
that's happening.
it was. I had gone home a number of years ago. I hadn't been back, visited home in quite a while, and when I back down, it had been a number of years. Like I literally had to use GPS to get my way around. Like all my landmarks were gone. All my knowing where things were just didn't exist anymore. Like I had to use GPS to just be able to get to my parents' house that I grew up in, get to my sister's new house that was, a handful of miles away or something like that. Like I'm okay with it now because I know building markers and all these sort of things now, but like just the development in the Orlando metro area about the I-4 corridor is just ridiculous, and much less areas that between there and my way down that were dead zones of nothing, very small little nothing towns, minimal, old Florida looking areas is all completely developed now. Like it's crazy. Everybody wants to move to Florida for some damn reason.
In my neighborhood, there's a lot of houses that are up for sale right now and up for rent. And I think that, I think everybody went through last year's storm season and they kind of recouped. A lot of people fled here during, 2020, 2021 during COVID and everything. A lot of people came here and I think they went through a couple storm seasons and now they're like, you know what? I've got a couple years of paying on my mortgage and I think I'm ready to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah, that's definitely, especially if they're coming from parts of the country where, they don't get exposed to those big mega weather systems coming in acutely and devastating whole areas. It's not like a tornado that just comes through and knocks out a number of houses over a couple mile stretch. I mean, hurricanes are pretty devastating down there particularly coastally, I mean, I remember going through a couple in the Orlando area and, it wasn't as a kid. And I don't remember it being anything major, but also it was in the middle of the state. So that is a little different than anybody living, within 20 miles of the coast.
Oh yeah, I'm on the Gulf Coast, and I'm 20 minutes from the beach. So
yeah, you're in dead level zone right there. I mean, complete devastation when the aim is right.
Yeah, I think my elevation is 13 feet. I mean, you got to be a different kind of person to stick it out here.
Right. Apparently, there's a lot of different kind of persons down there. And still
there are.
I mean, I try to tell my family every time you guys have big stuff coming through. I'm like, just get in the car, just drive northwest. 4 hours.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, we're staying. I'm like, okay, whatever. We got our generator. Great, you get your generator. Good for you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how. Yeah, whatever.
You gotta hunker down.
Yeah. Yes. They've got their bread and milk, right? So you're good. I don't know what good bread and milk's going to do, but
I never get the milk thing. That never happens. I do peanut butter and bread.
First thing it's going to spoil is dairy. Like, why are we worried about the milk?
But, I never do milk. That's the dumbest thing to get.
Canned goods. Like, canned goods are good.
Yeah.
Particularly canned goods that are like pretty palatable when it's not heated too. That's even better,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, peanut butter, bread, and water. Those are my go-tos to stash.
I mean, I go back down to Florida often enough as it is. It's just like I get down there. I'm like, man, I'd love to live by my family. I'd love to be around for my folks and be able to help do shit and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like I can't afford to live down there. I can't do anything that's going to make enough money to live down there. I don't want to live around with those people. Just don't. I take my trips and I go down there and go see bands play or go to reptile shows or do whatever going down to do. And I come back home where it's quiet and less crazy up here.
Yeah. So getting back to the pythons, have you recently bred your white lips?
No. The original pair that I got turned out to be 2 boys. I was a little questioning when I first got them off a friend. The probing seemed a little deep for the female. And I was like, So I guess it's been quite a while since I rodent python and not just, sex some colubrid. So I was like, all right. And I cycled them and I cycled it. I knew I'd have success because I knew what I had success doing years ago. And then that following, it got into like late spring. And I'm like, I'm not like, this isn't happening. Like, this isn't happening. And I pulled the two of them out and I was like, yeah, you're both boys. So I have since acquired a young import female for those two long-term captive males. She's not there yet. So she's got another, realistically, probably 2 years before she's up to size. So we'll see what happens. I may still acquire a second female, seeing as I have two boys at some point if the opportunity arises.
Oh, wow.
To add to the group. And then I just added that pair of nice, large juvenile, whatever size, 3 or 4 foot size southern pair that have been doing great, import pair. So they're doing wonderful. Such a temperament difference between those two locality species.
Oh, really?
God, those southerns, and that's the way I remember them years ago with the pair that I had that was basically similar size. They're just like the most laid back, passive, easygoing snakes. Meanwhile, you just look twice in the northern, much less touch them, and they're like the world's coming to an end. They're just super intolerant of interaction. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to be looked at. They just want to be left in their place and not bothered. So, which is fine. They're beautiful. So I don't care. That's fine with me. You poop every once in a while. You feed every once in a while. And you don't want to be messed with. I can do that. That's easy.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Timor pythons.
Yeah, I don't. I treat that girl the same way I do those white lips. I don't touch them.
Yeah.
I just leave her alone. I just walk around her and leave it at that. She's more forward as far as wanting to eat and stuff like that, and out more than the way they are. But like, it's pretty obvious that they don't like to be touched. They don't want to be interacted with. So I'm like, that's fine. The pop ones, I pull them out. I mean, once I get past that initial like, are you going to feed me sort of moment, and put them in my hand, like they're great. Like they're totally chilled and laid back. And the red tails are the same way. But yeah, that Timor's, I just treat it like a white lip. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Work around it. It's the easiest. It makes them happy. Doesn't put stress on them. Leave it be.
Yeah.
But they're so beautiful. I mean, that thing. It was like one of the species that like I never thought I'd even be around, much less get a chance to own. And a buddy was partying with one, and it was a good opportunity. So I grabbed it with plans to add to the group, and so I'm hoping before the end of the year, maybe I can add at least a male, if not a couple more. We'll see if my opportunity becomes available.
Yeah, I have 2.1 Timors.
Cool.
All
nice.
captive bred by Ryan Young.
Cool. Very good.
And,
very good. You got 2 males. That's pretty token.
Yeah. I really like them. They're a lot of fun. I'm a little worried. I was talking to Andy Carbon yesterday, who's over in the UK. He does a lot with emeralds, and he has Timors as well. He said his female is like 9 feet long. She's huge.
Man, that's a lot. That's a lot.
And he said he was feeding.
How big Genesis were that was on your show. His girl is pretty big up there, and I remember seeing him when I went up when he first opened that herp house. I went up and towards the zoo, and I guess I just really don't remember them being that impressive. But maybe I didn't see the right animal. Maybe I only saw males or something. I don't remember.
Yeah, maybe they just didn't grow enough.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I remember him having Timors when I went and toured the facility, but I don't remember seeing an animal that I went, holy shit, that's big, because my girl's like, I don't know, 4+ foot or somewhere in there. I mean, she's not huge, small rat size or a couple mice size, animal, nothing major.
Yeah. How old is she?
From what I gathered from my buddy, she was a baby import in 21, so just a couple years old now.
Okay.
And I'm not pushing to feed her. I don't feed her heavy. Just, she's really wants some food right now. She's been, every time I'm in the area, she's watching me. So I know I need to feed her.
Yeah, that's their thing that they do. I know mine do the same thing. It's like if I'm sitting there editing a video, they're just like zeroed in on me. Like, does he have a rat? Is he going to
Yeah,
open the
I mean,
door?
the carpets are the same way. I kind of have the carpets more on a seasonal, cyclical feeding pattern for breeding reasons, that sort of thing. But with some of these guys that I'm not breeding, it's more of just like, yeah, I didn't feed you last week, so you might be due, and see what's going on this weekend. Maybe I'll feed you. If not, I'll feed you the next week. Again, particularly ones where I just have like a single animal at the moment. I'm not pushing them. So as long as they have good body weight, I'm not too concerned with any of it.
How do you feed your I mean, what draws you to the pop ones? Why are you drawn to the pop one carpets?
One, I like the variability in the species, like phenotypically, there's a lot of variability. And two, the fact that we have access to the fresh blood is a huge draw for me. A lot of the Aussie stuff, we had such bottleneck genetics available, can't get stuff legally. Most stuff that came in was probably not particularly legally, in the past with sketchy backgrounds and no good information. So um, just the fact that, you can kind of go a lot of different directions with Papuans naturally without hyper focusing on, a morph or something, as well as that, fresh blood is available, and I've got several that are wild caught, several that are S1s, and then one pair that's multi-generational captive stuff. So, just, I like being able to have good genetic diversity for long-term, sort of management more than
What's
anything.
your preferred phenotype for them? Do you have like a direction that you're looking to go in with your
I've been
pairings?
trying to go one direction based on two import females that I have, which is dark.
Mm.
Um, Unfortunately, I've not been able to produce well in that direction. And granted, I've only been breeding them now last year and this year, but um, I haven't produced well in that direction. I think it's mostly just male usage. I think my males, the male that I used last year, and then him and this, I didn't breed one of my dark females this year. So I just think the male usage just hasn't been as on point as what they are. And maybe the males have dominated genetically what's come forth. Just getting a little bit more that background banding, the yellows and stuff like that than what I want and what the females look like. Because the females are super dark with very little, yellow patterning and stuff like that. And
Mm.
I think just the males that I've been using so far have not hit that mark. I've been getting some dark pattern, when in the pattern, but they'll have a high contrast yellow, yellow to goldy sort of background pattern based off of particularly the one big male that I've got.
Yeah.
I used a new male this year that's just old enough, an F1 new blood, with one of my girls this year, and still kind of evaluating. But they actually threw that pairing through even lighter babies than I expected to see, like super red, no marking, light
Wow.
colored stuff. So I got very much what I didn't expect out of that. So, um, it's just I'm going to ultimately end up kind of going in the direction of where I end up, as opposed to maybe where I want, maybe with intentions of going one way. So, everybody likes a nice, good tricolor contrasted animal, for the most part, and so I've got a good bit of that. Um, Otherwise, particularly with young stuff, I'm raising up and stuff, and juveniles and subadults. So there'll definitely be some good. Some of the stuff I held back from last year have been really phenomenal looking. And uh, one of my girls that's an import, I got when I got her clutch of babies at the same time. I've got one male I held back from that. He's turning out to be a really nice, high contrast tricolor, just deep blacks, nice oranges, nice yellows, all the above. So um, kind of just going wherever what I produce takes me on the grand scheme of things. I mean, one of my females is like a super high gold animal, very little other
Mm.
color, and I kept back a couple of her offspring. I have one again. That was when I got some babies from when I acquired her, and so I've got one of her males from that um, pairing from 2 years ago, and then I held back a couple to kind of see how they go from her this year, and we'll see kind of what direction it ends up going. But I really want to do black. I'm just not been able to really make that happen yet to really focus
Yeah.
on that. Just because these two import girls that I got off my buddy Jake, um, he acquired both separately, different sourcings of importing, and they're just super dark animals, and they're awesome. And I'd like to be able to go in that direction. I just haven't been able to, I guess, hit the right males to them. So I don't know if I'll be successful going down that road, but keep trying. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much variability with them, like you said, phenotypically, and you see one that's like a burnt orange with like the vibrant yellows mixed in with it, and then if you can get even like the dark banding mixed in on top of that, where it's super high contrast, that's an incredible looking animal right there.
Yeah, I think just especially when you compare them, and we'll just compare them to jungles being the closest phenotypically, to them, and now I guess considered to be the same snakes through the recent rearrangement of carpets that poplands are the same as jungles and that sort of thing. The captive breeding efforts over the past couple of decades have really bottlenecked the phenotype of jungle carpets. Like, they basically all look the same. They all look phenomenal. You don't see the tipping, you don't see the browning, you don't see any of that cool stuff that used to exist back in the 90s, in the late 80s. And so it's like, well, everybody's got the same damn looking snake. That's not too cool. I mean, I guess I like the MIA jungles because that's some new blood that came in from apparently a different region of range of what I guess maybe most of the other stock has been line bred for looking like.
They're called MIA because they flew into Miami International, right?
Yes, that's what my buddy that I know is working with some animals came into Miami, confiscated, went Saturday school somewhere, and then eventually, after many years, managed to get bred and make it into the hobby. And they match a particular phenotypically, they match a particular locality, but because it was a competition and a smuggled import situation, they, there's still a lot of nose origins. Were they captive born? Were they wild caught? Were they? Who knows? Don't know.
Yeah.
But phenotypically, I think they're kind of cool. They're heavy black and just different just a different look. Different look than what everybody's line bred for the past 25, 30 years.
Yeah. Have you seen Lucas Lee's Priceline jungles?
I can't say that specifically I have, no. And
maybe you got to go check them out.
Just seeing a picture maybe, but not that I recall specifically.
I'll send you some pictures of them because they are wild. And I think that he thought he had two males, and I think he was going to get rid of them, and he had offered one to me, and he had paired them up and they weren't going, and then all of a sudden he got an ovulation, like literally like 2 weeks after he asked me if I wanted one, and so he produced babies this year. So
cool.
That's and they have that burnt orangey yellow mustardy color, and a lot of tipping, really beautiful animals.
Yeah, it used to be just so different back in the day when jungles were first being bred, because you'd have a few people with like really glow, high contrast, beautiful animals, and then other people had more dirty looking ones, and but everybody like basically just focused in on the super bright stuff, and now there's less variability within jungles to appreciate maybe how they are naturally in the wild, just because we have limited resources for stock, due to in country laws over there and etc. So that's why I just kind of think popwoods are cool, because you can, small numbers still come in every year, and you can get new blood if you want to, and it keeps it interesting, at least for a while longer. With lack of blood, a lot of people have wild caught blood, so hopefully that'll be beneficial for that species, locality, whatever people want to call them these days.
So you're really big into herping here in the States. Have you done any herping abroad yet? Do you plan on it?
I herped a little bit in Mexico, which, it's hard to really, it's still North America. So I did that a little bit on a family trip when I was in like middle school, and that was minimal. But otherwise, no, I have not, as I haven't had a passport valid over almost 25 years. So if I ever get off my ass and get a passport again, which seems to just get pushed aside and forgotten about, maybe I will. I've been wanting to actually go hit some of those big shows in Europe just to go see those shows, and I still would like to go down and do some tropical America herping. Just kind of hasn't happened.
Yeah.
I don't know, because there's enough stuff regionally in the eastern half of the U.S. Hell, I still haven't even herped out west. There's so much stuff that I can get to domestically that the hassle and expense of going farther away has not been a big enough draw to do. There's a chance I may get to go to Puerto Rico next year to go herp, but that's not set in stone yet. Wife's got
maybe you'll see some retics.
Yeah, wife's got a potential job thing to do over a weekend down there next fall.
Oh, nice.
And once I looked at what the flights were, I was like, I'm going, and we're going to make the trip a little longer. And you go judge dogs, and I'll go herping and birding the rest of the time.
Nice.
That sounds extremely alluring between getting to see some Puerto Rican boas and all the anoles, all the bird species that are on that island. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. So we thought we were going to be going this October, but it got pushed off to next October based on the needs of the kennel club down there. So we'll hopefully be going down there next year, but no contracts have been signed yet, so nothing's set in stone.
Yeah, and they have quite a bit of reticulated pythons down there as well, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, they've been introduced down there, as I understand. So, which I guess that would be cool to see. I'm more fascinated with seeing the diversities and the bird diversity, as well as getting to see Puerto Rican boas and some of the other cool native stuff. I mean, I can see retics. Let's go to a reptile show in one of the states where I can legally see them. I guess can't see them in my state or your state, but some of the neighboring states I could go see them. So I guess that's not as much as getting to go see a Puerto Rican boa or some of the random obscure anole species on that island would be really cool to get to photograph. So
what's your favorite rat snake? Which rat snake is your favorite?
Yellows it's a close fold between just a good classic yellow rat snake from along the St. Johns River and Gulf hammock rat snakes. It's somewhere between those two. Gulf hammock rat snakes are just phenomenal locality animal from down there in a habitat that doesn't exist anywhere else except for where they are, and makes those animals be unique unto themselves. They're just cool animals, temperament wise. They're very cryptically polymorphic, depending on exactly where you actually find the animal. So it just makes for a really cool, interesting animal that isn't found anywhere else. But it's hard to beat a nice, bright yellow, black striped yellow rat snake, in my opinion. It's partially a nostalgia thing growing up and, seeing some big, cool yellow rat snake crossing the road when I was a kid, that makes them amazing to me. So, and I keep a lot of different localities of yellow rat snakes. So from all the way down to the Keys to all the way up to coastal North Carolina. So I've got lots of different locales. So add another locality just at Daytona, getting a pair of another county off a friend. So, and I'll probably add another locality either probably this winter after some eggs hatch that were just laid that a buddy has. So have a bit of a yellow rat snake problem, but I've got friends with worse yellow rat snake problems than me. So my buddy Jake's got more localities than I do. So he's got a bigger problem than me. So,
so do you ever mess around with maternal incubation, or do you mostly do artificial?
I have not let my pythons do that yet.
Yeah.
I've thought really hard about it and come really close to doing it, and I haven't done it yet. So I may do that one of these days with the pop ones. It's a want and just haven't yet. And again, I've only gotten back into, back in the day, it was never even we never even thought about that stuff back in the 90s and early 2000s of something to do. It's like you pull eggs and you put them in an incubator. You didn't let mom do it. Like that could go wrong, right? Like we know how to do it better with an incubator, right? So, and there is some delicacies, I think, obviously with doing maternal incubation, making sure that, that the microenvironment around where she's going to stay is suitable, obviously, humidity-wise and temperature-wise. And it's harder to manage that in a cage than it is in a, refrigerator that we have dialed in to be perfect, with a perfect container inside that environment to have it sit in. So, I want to. I think it would be really cool to do it. So it'll probably be on the table one of these days. Just have it, especially because the only reason I ever even fire up my incubator is just for my pop-up carpets now. I just have it sitting actually across the room over in the corner, and it's on for 2.5 months of the year, and that's it. And it gets turned back on.
Yeah.
It's just like, it looks like she's getting ready to get, laid. She's getting pretty fat, probably pretty close. I better turn this thing on. Make sure the temp's right. Within 2 weeks, I start getting clutches and unplug it when the last one hatches. So,
how do you incubate? Like, what kind of media do you use?
With the pop ones, I just use peat moss. Same thing I use with my rat snakes, and I did with my king snakes and everything. I love peat moss. It's just like great big bales of it for really affordable price at Lowe's or Home Depot type situation, and it's what I use in my nesting boxes with the rat snakes, and it's the same thing I use in my egg containers. Just peat moss, just adjusting, moisture levels to the needs of the species involved. I do my rat snakes much drier than what I do the carpet pythons. But still, I don't do the carpet pythons terribly damp either. I just know that I need to be able to have a nice dew line on the top. And as long as I can see a dew line inside the cage, I'm pretty content. And going well so far. 2 clutches this year, 2 clutches last year. Everything's done well. So not going to change it. So.
And what about the rat snakes? How do you incubate their eggs?
I just throw them on a shelf in the snake room in the closet.
Nice.
Same exact containers that I put the carpet pythons in. I just do them a little drier. You tend to see, albeit anecdotal, I don't know of anybody that's actually done true research in it, but it seems to be like colubrid eggs that are incubated either too wet and or too warm. You tend to have more problems with babies with deformities and that sort of thing, kinking and other things. Sometimes I guess that happens regardless, because every once in a while you still see some little spinal bumps or something, particularly if you are producing, a good few, you get those odds in there. But it tends to be a little bit more prominent when you're doing them too wet. And you tend to get a little bit bigger babies that are that sit in the egg longer and absorb their yolks if you're doing them a little cooler on the cooler side. So,
okay,
I just throw them in a container that has a little bit of moisture in them, and the peat moss isn't dry, but it's not damp. Like I can't even come close to wringing some moisture out of it. And I just set them up in there and label the container and throw it on the shelf, on the top shelf of that closet, and start looking at them after 60 days, because at the temps they are at, they usually take at least 70 days. So,
okay.
Usually at least 70 days on anything but fox snakes. I'm not hatching fox snakes at home anymore. So his friends have those guys these days. So I'm not doing those. And those guys start hatching usually at like 43, 44 days normally. And mine usually went closer to 49, 50.
And they're at the same, those eggs are at that same ambient temperature of the room, that 80 degrees.
Yep. Yeah. It probably sits a little bit cooler probably in that closet, just because it's off the room, and whether or not I've got the door open to that closet, depending on what's in there. Occasionally I've got a snake sitting in there or whatever, because I needed to separate it off from the housing, because I co-have a lot of stuff. Sometimes I need to pull a snake off, and I may have a Rubbermaid or two sitting in that closet. That'll, depending on the time of the year, affect whether or not I've got that closet door open much. But just whatever the room's at. So upper 70s, it probably sits at in that closet, somewhere in that neighborhood. Maybe the first early clutches, that are being laid in February or early March, it's probably even a little cooler than that in that portion of the closet, just because it's not getting exposure to the fan, the heater rotation in the room that's in there. I have like a standing rotating sort of heater that I use in there during the winter, and then it's just a fan in the summer months. So it probably stays a little cooler in there. But again, I don't really temp gun in there because I know that walking in there, I know what the temperature needs to feel like, and I know it's fine. So I don't get too anal with it. 80 degrees feels fine. I know what 80 degrees feels like. I start feeling a little warm in the room, probably a little warm in the room. So I should probably shut the window and, make sure that the AC's affecting the room a little bit more. So, I do have a few heat pads in that room with a few things. Like the Sambos have access to a heat panel, heat pads underneath their tubs. And I actually put the Southern White Lips, I think, some under them just to see if they utilize it or if they stay away from it.
Yeah.
And so then I'll kind of decide. The first 2 months I think I had them, they were just ambient in the room. And I was like, well, I kind of make some room on this shelf and I can put a heat pad. I got an extra one. So I put them on there and I'm just watching where they stay in the cage and if they're utilizing it at all. So if I don't see them basically utilizing it, then I'll just take it away and just be in there ambiently on the ground. And which I do let that room go down temperature-wise a few degrees to be a bit of a mental click with the photoperiod change of the window from outside, but it's minimal. It's a minimal change.
Okay. And how do you ensure that the Nerodia are getting the temperatures that they need for their gestation period?
They do really well at that. They tend to actually, it's surprising. I tend to notice them when they're gravid actually staying away from the warm area of the cage, which is usually the front edge of the cage, because that's where the heat would be getting exposed to first. I tend to actually notice my gravid females staying away from that more times than not.
Interesting.
So they don't, I'm sure they will utilize it some, but they don't really seem to need it as much. And look, even for digesting meals and stuff, like it just doesn't seem to make a difference. No different than a gravid rat snake. Like they tend to hide more times than not during those periods of time because they're more vulnerable to a predator. They're not physically able to get away from a predator as much, right? Like so they're more at risk. So it's more natural for these guys that are, either carrying live babies or producing eggs, to avoid, being out and about. A lot of these guys go off food for a lot of those periods of time naturally in the wild because, hunting is a risk to do when you're big and fat and can't move around well. So you'll find a good spot that's thermally good for them, not too hot, not too cool, or they don't have to move much to fit within that gradient that they need. But a lot of it just is watching your snakes and understanding what your snakes are doing. Like, that was kind of why, like when I had my white lips out in these cages out here and they had heat panels on them, like LED lights on them. Like I just basically noticed that and I started acquiring more of these poplins. Like I started just realizing that like these white lips were never using the heat panel. Like literally only a couple times over a year and a half or 2 years did I ever see them even get a heat panel. And I was like, they don't need this. And I know what they need to be able to be cycled. Like they prefer a cooler temperature. So I'm like, I'm going to see how they do in the snake. They've done great. Super in there, with no focused heat source. So, and honestly, I mean, I see the carpets and stuff utilize it a little bit more, but they don't use it a lot. Like usually they'll go and sit right after a meal for a little while under the heat panel, but I don't see them. They tend to stay on the other side of the cage that ends up being more in the range of what my snake room sits at.
Yeah.
More than they do on the side of it, in the areas of the enclosure where the heat panel affects them and the temps may be up in the mid or upper 80s, as opposed to the other side of the cage at maybe 78 or 79. They just watching where your animals spend most of their time and how they're utilizing what you're providing them allows you to be able to, improve how you're managing them essentially, because we're all just keeping snakes in boxes, so paying attention to how they're utilizing what you're giving them can help you tweak what you're doing over time. You know, if I'm opening water snake cages and I'm constantly feeling, literally like humidity when I open a bin, all right, well, I need to increase ventilation in that cage, right? Or I see some animals getting some issues in one way or another. Okay, well, what do I need to do to fix that? The same thing with, just watching them. These display cages make it a little bit easier. These black boxes to visually see them. There's LED lights on them. Display animals. I can see them, but I can learn how they're utilizing what I'm providing them and figure out, am I giving them, is it too hot? Is it too cool? Are they spending too much time near the heat? Are they spending too much time away from it? And they're going to know, they know what they need. They're going to go to what they need. And if they're not utilizing certain things or overutilizing certain things, well, then I need to change it, right? To give them better options. They're just never going near the heat panel. Well, maybe the heat panel's too damn hot. I need to drop it down a few degrees. Or if they're spending all their time there, well, maybe I need to up it a couple of degrees. And, with all this fancy technology nowadays, we got all these wonderful little programmable things that we plug everything into. It makes it pretty easy. I can just walk over there, push a few buttons, and bump one cage, up a few degrees. Or take in the fact that these cages are stacked and there's a heat panel attached below that same side. So the bottom cages don't get the same sort of heating that the upper level cages do because they don't have a heat panel below them affecting the surface temperature of the cage that's on the same side of the cage as the heat panel, as the upper cages do. So those guys on the bottom are going to actually be a little cooler than the ones up farther because they don't have a double heat source affecting them. So just feed your animals, pay attention to your animals. They'll tell you what they need if you can pay attention and interpret what you're seeing. And it's not necessarily seeing it today or tomorrow. It's seeing over 6 months, seeing it over 12 months, seeing it over 2 years, seeing it over 10 years. Those sort of patterns, watching what your animals do, allows you to be able to adjust your husbandry practices and realize what they want/need as opposed to what you think they want or need for them. Because we think differently.
Why is it kind of a added cool factor that Nerodia don't lay eggs? I mean, is that neat to experience?
It's got its value. I'll tell you that. Like, it's easier, but it's also stressful at the same time, right? Like, you've got a lot of variables that go into them when they're going to produce. Like, typically, most of them, it's like a 4-month thing, kind of the same way the egg layers are. You've got roughly a 4-month window from a snake becoming gravid and egg hatching, right? On a rat snake or a king snake, right? It's roughly that. And most water snakes, it's roughly that. I have some that literally, as I see the breedings and I palpate my females on a routine basis, like I will have a clutch born in 2 months from breeding. And then I have others that will go 5 and 6 months. And I have others that will double clutch the same year and they will produce a second clutch in 3 months. Like it's kind of crazy how it works. And it tends to be like, well, she can drop any time, or I think a female is going to be, I've kind of gotten to be a bit of a joke with the waters that they're like, oh, they look like they could drop at any time, so I got 2 more months. I've gotten to be the point of where like I almost stop expecting when these females are going to drop because some of them will really surprise me and drop them way sooner or way later than when. When I went down to IHS in Florida, I had cages marked with some tape for my wife just to check because some of the females could have had some pretty big litters and I didn't really want to have any issues going on with them not getting access to moisture enough, because they need to get to water because they're shedding when they're first born and those sort of things. So I was having to check stuff. And like some of those damn snakes didn't drop for 2 more months, right? Like it's just, so it's a little more predictable when you're dealing with egg layers as far as the pattern of that happening in some of these live bearers, at least in the case of Nerodia. It's a little less predictable, at least in my experience over the years. The stand boys seem to be a little bit more straightforward, but even, I don't know, just live bearers in general tend to be a little bit more unpredictable, at least with what I've worked with as far as timing things. I know some of these BOA guys really got their timing down to, it's shed here, the babies are going to be born here, and they really have dialed in, but I don't know. I don't find across the board consistency with that. I see I have some generalities on most, and then others they're playing their own fiddle and have their own rules. I just have to roll with it.
Yeah. How many babies do you normally see? Like how many neos are you getting? And do you see a lot of slugs? Are there a lot of stillbirths in there? Like what does that look like?
Varies completely. It depends on species. I mean, you got a big difference between an adult female salt marsh snake from Key Largo that may be 12 inches long. I've got one that's either at least ovulated, if not gravid right now, those, and literally she's 12 inches long. Versus I have
That's
some,
insane, dude. That's so
yeah,
wild.
the male's not 6 inches, like
Oh my
tiny
God,
little
dude. I had
things, right?
no idea they were that tiny.
Tiny. You get away from the mainland, they're tiny, tiny. And then you go
Wow.
compare it against, let's say I've got some pushing 6 foot, yellow belly, red belly waters, or
Yeah.
5 foot diamondback waters. Like there's a big difference. Like my big female yellow belly dropped a litter. I don't know when that was, a couple weeks ago, right before Daytona. It happened. She dropped right before Daytona, or right after. Either way, she dropped 30 babies. That's a big difference. Like then
Wow.
most of my salt marsh snakes give me 6 to 10 window neighborhood right in there. Occasionally, I've on a couple bigger females that have maybe a little bit more banded influence. I've gotten 12 or 13 out of. Most of them are doing 5 to 8, somewhere in that neighborhood. Um,
What's a big salt marsh when you say big?
uh, 2 foot with some heavy body weight.
Okay.
I mean, and that's like some of the one locality that I've been breeding the most of, like come down near your way, which is Lee County.
Yeah.
Some of my original stock had more banded influence. It may not have been particularly obvious, but their size alone suggested they had banded influence because they were husky animals and a little bit on the
Hmm.
larger side. And those girls would give me, a dozen babies, 10, 12 babies most of the time. Some of my other girls from other spots within that county don't get nearly as big as those girls. And they usually have 6 or 8. So it varies. And the stuff from the Keys usually I've had piss poor success over the years with these Keys animals that I've had, but they have under 5 and they're tiny. They're threads. They're tiny. They're delicate. They're hard to maintain. They're hard to get going,
Hmm.
hard to feed, hard to keep happy because they're so stinking small, you know. But as opposed to a diamondback water snake baby that pops out huge and starts eating frozen thawed cut up fish and pinky pieces, big difference. So, and it
Yeah.
really depends. Like some litters, like, I had that yellow belly litter just recently that gave me 30, I think 30 babies even. I didn't, I didn't find any slugs in that, but yet a banded water that's right below her that has been very hit or miss to me producing out of her. And she's an F1 baby. I'm breeding to an F1 female that was born in 2018 or 2019. I think 2018. And I'm breeding her to a wild caught male that she's bred with before, and I've already got a female that I've raised up that is now ovulating out of them. I have not been able to produce any babies the past couple of years from them. She's not ovulating, whatever. She ovulated this year, and they bred. I got a pile of slugs,
Mm.
a couple stillborn, 2 live kinked, and 1 live viable good baby. No good reason. I mean, it's not like there's some inbreeding coefficient involved. It's not like, granted, they're from a small, somewhat isolated population where I go of a series of retention ponds, where that stock originates. But it's an F1 female that was born before I caught the male from stock that was caught 5 or 6 years before. So I don't know why. I don't know why she's been difficult to produce, whereas other females that'll produce for me every single year that I want them to. So who knows? Most of the time I get minimal slugs and minimal stills. And then other females like that one was a real disappointment. I was really looking forward to because they're phenomenal high red banded waters
Mm.
from Pensacola area in Escambia County. And they're just phenomenally gorgeous animals. People tend to just really be drawn to red water snakes. It seems to be like their go-to, whether it's red salt marshes or red banded waters or whatever. It's a real thing people are drawn to.
Yeah.
There's phenomenal looking animals. So it was real disappointing that I only got like one good viable baby out of the bunch. So see what the future holds between their daughter, and I guess technically her half brother. I bred that wild caught male years ago to another unrelated female and got those two young ones paired up, and then the older pair now. But I don't know why I've struggled with them. I didn't struggle with them years ago producing them, and then I just kind of got in this rut the past couple of years of those two. So I'm just doing like more drastic food cycling with them to try to trigger better. That's what I did this past year. It worked, and so I'm hoping going forward maybe it'll be better. But I don't know why I've not had a litter that with such piss poor results as that in any time I can remember. So, but I get a lot of I get a lot of females that ovulate that the boys aren't ready, and I just get a whole litter of just slugs that never got bred. But I get a lot of that with young females with their males. I've raised the males up with them, siblings, and the males just aren't. The females tend to be very bullying, dominating in water snakes because they grow bigger and they eat more and they're more aggressive personality wise. And so sometimes the males, it takes a while for those males to basically have the balls to get it done, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I tend to get younger females that ovulate and the boys just aren't ready. And I could technically go put those females with maybe older males that I have, like their dads or somebody else I've got, but I tend to be kind of strict with how I pair and what I pair to keep genetics the way I want them, so to speak, I guess. It's not just about producing offspring, it's about producing the right offspring for the right reasons that I think are the right reasons, at least. Genetic diversity, phenotypic understanding, those sort of things, That's so, it's, you just end up with some that just aren't ready yet at the same time. And so I had a couple females that just slugged out this year because the boys weren't old enough or big enough or brazen enough to get the job done when they needed to. So we'll get there in time.
Do you ever have concerns about inbreeding, or not so much because you're collecting these animals from the wild?
I very much do, and that's why genetic diversity is so important to me. And that's why with a lot of my projects, I try to go back to those same areas in future years and bring new blood in when I can to help increase genetic diversity. There's some projects that I have, like, let's say my Darkhorse rat snakes. My friend originally collected the stock in southern Key Largo back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I've not been able to add true, verifiable new blood to the project. Like people say they'll have some and stuff, and like they've got no track record on the animal. I don't trust the sourcing, so I'm not going to deal with it. Right? They're just saying they are, and they may or may not be, and I don't take that chance. But in those cases, animals from insular situations tend to have worked out their kinks genetically because they have such harsh environments that they live in, such limited G pools where they live, that they've worked out problems. Mother Nature's already gotten rid of all their crap, that maybe those pressures aren't as bad in mainland populations of stuff, of rat snakes or water snakes. So I tend to, as much as I really want some new Darkhorse blood, I haven't been able to procure any that I can 100% say, where they came from and that they definitely are, tracked back to specific places. But most of my other projects, I try to get new blood. Often I was able to acquire some new blood this year at one locality, banded water, that I originally captured early gravid female back in 2015, 2016, somewhere back, maybe 2017, somewhere back in that neighborhood. And my project is basically stemmed off of that wild caught gravid. And I had probably taken 12, 15 trips down that same road, the same area, trying to get new blood over the years when I travel home, and never saw another banded water snake on that damn road.
Wow.
And then this spring, I managed to collected a pair. We saw 3. I collected a pair. It was right before they had started. It was like just getting into breeding. It was a little cool. It was just getting into breeding, and the pair bred. and I got a clutch. So I've got some wonderful fresh new blood to infuse into that bloodline to go forward. So I'm super happy about that. And that's kind of like how I work if I can. If I can get new blood, I'd like to collect 2.2 if that's an option when I go out. That way I've got a pretty decent gene pool to start with. And ideally, like with water snakes, I try to collect them when they're already gravid. That way those babies are even new more blood to add to the whole program when I get the project started. Because they won't be more than likely not related to the males I may collect at that particular spot. And so I've got a nice group genetically to go forward with for even a few generations, where I don't necessarily have to work at it, but I also have pins on my phone of where all these animals came from so that I can go back to those areas or bug a friend that lives in that area and say, hey, can you watch for what I need from that area down the road? If you come across them, and then I can plug that into, even just one male can go a long ways to, infusing into a bloodline to keep it fresh. And, is it necessary? I don't know. We've inbred the hell out of a whole lot of snakes in captivity so far. Some with problems, some without problems, right? I mean, look at red rat snakes alone. I mean, we got 5,000 dwarfs out there and bred the hell out of them. Some people say there's problems with some, and other people say no, they're great. So whatever. But for me, I think it's important, and I try to, establish a good base genetically going forward, and try to be able to, if I can, offer people, unrelated blood, like the amylonistic Gulf hammock rat snake project that I'm working with my buddy. Like we're putting a strong effort into making sure that it's not just, we're just not trying to produce as many, visual amylonistic animals right off the bat. Like that's not our goal. We want them established in captivity. We want a good genetic base, and we want to keep infusing fresh blood into the project to ensure that it's healthy once it gets out there, as opposed to just like, oh, we got this albino and we need to breed it. We're just going to breed back to produce as many albinos right off the bat. It's not my goal, not my objective. I want to have a healthy start if I'm going to bring something, bring a locality or bring a morph project, to herpetoculture. I want it to be as healthy as possible genetically so that there's a good foundation going forward. And if I can be able to even offer unrelated stuff to folks so that they can not necessarily go right out and just breed albino to albino to albino to albino. Let's bring some unrelated blood normals in and het stuff to keep it healthy for the next 20 or 30 years, or farther, whatever.
How often do you find morphs when you're out herping or collecting?
You sit there and you think about it and you're like, you never see that kind of stuff, right? And then I go back and I look at pictures like from field herping that I've like set aside in a folder in my Facebook page from years ago, particularly. It's like, because I tend to, when I go field herping, I actually tend to do more amphibian hunting, like hunting salamanders and stuff like that. That tends to be like my go-to fun thing, as opposed to hunting snakes and stuff. Snake hunting tends to more be road cruising, and I really despise road cruising. I find it boring. I'm not in the environment, right? Like I don't want to just sit in a car, right? I don't want to sit in a car and just drive around the same couple roads all the time. Like it's tiresome. I want to be out hiking in the woods, right? Hiking in a pine savanna. I want to be hiking in the mountains, So I tend to gravitate towards hunting for, salamanders and stuff seasonally or in habitat. And like if I go to the Appalachians or something like that. And I actually realized that like when I look in my thing that I've got quite a few pictures of stuff that I found that were not normal animals, right? Like, this, aberrant looking salamanders, aberrant looking frogs, the little ground snakes. I found a melanistic one years ago. I've got a picture of that sitting on my phone, and some of the other projects, it's just been stuff that like my friend, mostly just my one friend that I worked with on some of my rat snake projects where, he's come across an oddball through all his traveling that he does and herping wise he goes around. And, he's found an oddball animal. We brought it in. I mean, the yellow belly water snake project, the ones that I call Caspers, we were actually down rat snake hunting and water snake hunting at the same time down in southern Louisiana. And he wanted to go in the area to look for rat snakes because phenotypically the rat snakes in that area were something he wanted to work with. So we made a trip planned and we went down there, and I wanted to do some water snake collecting too. And I collected a bunch of yellow bellies that we were road cruising at night and was going to sort them out in the morning and figure out if any of them were worth keeping or what I wanted to do with the project. I just grabbed mostly a couple of small ones and realized that one of them was the wrong color, right? It didn't have red bands on the side like they're supposed to as babies. They grow out of that by a year old or a little over a year old, depending on the area, but that disappears and then the yellow belly develops later and it's mostly a green and black. This one didn't have red bars on the side. So I was like, well, that's different. I bet it looks like a normal adult when it grows up because of the genetic change. So I held it back and held back another little male normal. Little male normal never established, but the one male did, and it looks like a normal yellow belly at this point. And you look at the baby pictures, you can tell it definitely never was born with red coloration. And bred it to a female from a neighboring parish that a buddy had acquired. And when we bred him, I bred him the first time in 2022. I got a totally new morph situation, like a total first generation F1 animals of a totally different looking animal that are both axanthic and anathoristic at the same time. And some of them in the litter are normal, and some of them aren't, and some of them are a bit of a gradient in between. Like, so you see, you come across stuff like that. Like, my buddy road cruised the amelanistic Gulf hammock. He was heading down to just go cruise the area and cruise the snake in the wild. The same thing. He found the amelanistic Glades County rat snake, the female originally back a long time ago, and they were, herping and walking the dog down in Moorhaven along the canal, and saw this little young rat snake that was really pretty in a tree, and he's not a morph guy at all, and just happened to be like, yeah, it looks like it's, a little something different, but it's pretty, so he kept it. And then when she was getting to be geriatric age, we ended up breeding her to a male that was about a mile and a half away. We started a line, and brought a new phenotype in a new line of amelanistic, locality pure rat snakes into the project. So you got to put your time in. I don't herp as much as I used to. Just life at the moment just isn't with work and everything else. I don't get out in the woods as much as I was years ago, but I still get out a handful of times a year with buddies. Go run around down in Florida or up in Tennessee or wherever it happened to head. So I think if you put your time in, you'd be surprised how often you actually come across something that's not typical for an area. We'll just put it that way,
Yeah, I have something. A picture I want to send you of a rat snake that I came up on. I was out at a job site and I saw two hawks like pouncing on something in some tall grass, and I go over and they fly off, and there's the most wound up rat snake I've ever seen in my whole life. I mean, he was so coiled up, like there wasn't a part of his body that wasn't coiled up, and like he had flexed out the bottom of his body, and he had like these sharp angles everywhere, but such a vibrant orange color. I mean, like a tangerine, just super vibrant.
There's some amazing snakes down in that region of the state. I mean, and it's individual to individual, really. It's kind of why the whole Everglades rat snake name subspecies got dropped years ago, because one, if you actually read the original text, like, it wasn't an orange snake. It was a very variable colored snake. And you can be in one little area and find animals that are very yellow rat looking, very orange looking, and then some that vary out to red, some with high stripes, some with no stripes. There's some incredible animals down there, midway down the lake and south. And there's some other animals you go, not all that pretty.
Yeah, we don't have that many rat snakes around us. When we see one, it's always awesome. And, unfortunately, there's so many transplants here that they all think that Nerodia are cottonmouths. So they murder the snot out of them. If they see them anywhere, they whack them with a shovel. And it's depressing. I mean, I had a friend once that was like, I've killed like 20 cottonmouths, and he pointed one out to me,
and not one of them was.
I can almost guarantee not one of them was.
Yeah. Yeah, especially considering the population density typically of bandits in any given area, versus population density of cottonmouths. It's usually not comparable. There's definitely been areas that I've been out herping that like I've seen 10 cottonmouths in you know a 50-yard stretch, but on the
Yeah.
whole, it's not like that. There's just sometimes certain times of the year you can come across those situations, but most of the part, particularly down in Florida, like you're running into those situations. It's bandits,
Yep.
around the waters. They're more tolerant of our secondary, third tier environments that we've created. They're more adaptable than the cottonmouths and other species, the venomous species in general. They're much less tolerant of us, and they don't
Yeah.
tend to adapt to the new environments that we've created.
Yeah, the Nerodia at my work, it's such a dense population there that those two man-made ponds that we have they just love them,
Yeah.
and there's so many animals around there. I mean, if like I said, you see them most in the winter because they're out getting that sunlight, but
Yep.
if you walk down towards the pond, you hear them all in the grass and shuffling
Yep.
around. And
If you go out there in the warmer months, you need to go out at night. Go out once the sun's set and it's full dark, and you go out there with flashlights. You'd probably see quite a few.
yeah, they are. They're
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 just
they're
they're
such
just hunkered down
cool
during the day
snakes.
when it's just too hot because it's downright miserable down there during the day. But
Yeah,
once that searing UV goes away, you know, they pop right out.
yeah. Do you have UV in these cages behind you, or is that all LED?
Just in the Europlatus cage, that one that's up right up there,
Okay.
there's a little UV Arcadia, little 12-inch UV strip that comes on for 1 hour. It probably was on earlier because it should have been on already. Comes
Yeah, I
on for
saw
an
it
hour,
before.
a little while in the morning, and then in like late afternoon, it comes on for another hour. Um,
Yeah.
but that's the only one. I've had another little one that I've like because I didn't kind of know where that project was going to go, so I've kind of like bought two of those little Arcadia mini little units
Yeah.
that I haven't even put up somewhere. But no, I don't have any generally on the other stuff. At the moment, there's just LEDs on everybody in those black box cages.
I lucked out with those 12-inch Arcadia UVB bulbs. They had them at, I think it was PetSmart for birds. And I guess nobody was buying UV for their birds. And so they had them on clearance. They were like 50 or 60% off. And I just
Oh
loaded up my
shit!
cart.
Yeah, you could at least, if nothing else, flip them. You know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll be holding on to those. They're the exact same thing as the reptile ones, just with a stand,
Oh,
and
okay, yeah,
yeah. But all right, man.
yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanna touch on, or I feel like I've drained all the Nerodia information out of you that I possibly could.
Yeah, for a non-Nerodia guy, you did pretty good.
Yeah, how'd I do for my first colubrid
You
podcast?
you did fantastic. Now we just got to get you to come to like Colubrid Fest.
I know. My buddy Phil King,
Yeah.
Wellington Exotics.
Yep.
He wants me to dabble with colubrids, but I'm just not about the poop and the constant feeding.
Yeah, but your interaction levels are different. Your experience is completely different. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's there's a guy that he helps a buddy across the way at Daytona, Kevin, who is a python and boa guy, right? Like that's all he does. But he lives near where I grew up and lives near my buddy that bends across the way from me. And he last year got a little male Seminole County yellow rat snake from me, because that's phenotypically what's right near him. He's in the next county above. And it's like literally he's got that in a display cage next to his bed in the bedroom. Like, just love that thing, right? Like it's beautiful. Like it's a totally different interaction and lifestyle for him to deal with that animal than what he does with his bloods and womas and boas and all that stuff other stuff that he's got. It's just
Yeah.
it's just a different experience. It's a different interaction with hobby dealing with. It's no different than if you're doing turtles or tortoises and doing pythons. Like your interaction is completely different. Your lifestyle is
Yeah.
completely different between doing those things. And so even when you're used to doing just pythons and boas and you go to a colubrid, it's a different experience. I like it better. I mean, I do like the laziness, so to speak, of the pythons and boas. Don't get me wrong. Like there's a certain kind of coolness that I like to, especially because I can set up nice, naturalistic looking cages and stuff like that. It's,
Yeah.
got a thing for it, because they're not going to tear it up. They don't move around much. They don't poop often. It's great. I can make a nice. Can't. I could do that with the others if I only had a few, but my goals at the moment are not that. My goals are to 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 learn about what I'm working with and to get them into herpetoculture and get people to realize the cool stuff. So I'm not going to kill myself trying to set up a display cage, keep a couple water snakes because it's too much of a balance of trying to keep things right for two different reasons.
Yeah, and it seems like it could be really deleterious to their health if you don't nail it.
Right. You got to nail it. And that's the thing with a lot of the naturalistic and bioactive type enclosures is you're creating an environment that's more suitable for the bioactive environment, not necessarily for the animal. It can be, but it's a lot of work. And if you only have one or two cages that you're doing this bioactive in, that's great. Like, go for it. But there's some animals that just can't tolerate those in the same environments that like all these plants and stuff need. It's some are fine with it. I mean, I've got different types of pothos and philodendrons growing in my pot point cages, right? I just take pieces of all of our plants, and once they're rooting a little bit, I throw them in there. They can grow as much as they want or not. They do okay. I don't have like good soil, so they're not. They're kind of subsisting in the same way some of them do. They're just growing in a jar of water. It's just pine bark and some moisture in there. But it allows me to do some of this, like I did in the zoo field, of creating naturalistic exhibits. To show people in microhabitats and environments where an animal that we're putting on exhibit looks like. I get to kind of play around with that some too in these cages. So
I think that if I ever get a colubrid, it'll probably be a black milk snake. I really like them. I like their natural history. I like, it's so cool where they come from. It's just and then the color change too is really neat.
I mean, the Indians, many of those bigger species are pretty cool. They're impressive. They're impressive big animals.
Yeah.
When you see adults, I don't think I've never kept any of those big milks. Most milks have not been my cup of tea when I've kept them and bred them, and I just tend to stay away from milks. But those guys are kind of in a different caliber down there. So
yeah. All right, man. Well, let's wrap this up. I appreciate you coming on, and yeah, man, it was great talking colubrids with you.
I appreciate it, man. It was a blast. I always like to talk about rats and waters anytime I can to anybody.
Hell yeah.